The print is not deep at first glance. It is only a shallow depression in a slab of stone, 3 toes pressed forward, 1 heel pad smoothed by time, the edges softened where water once tugged at the mud. Nothing in the shape announces a kingdom. Nothing about it says that an animal passed this way before grass existed, before flowers covered hillsides, before the continents looked like the map you know. It is simply a footfall left on a wet surface, buried by sediment, hardened by pressure, and lifted again into daylight after an absence almost too large to hold in the mind. Stand close to it, and the world begins to widen around that mark. The mud was once part of a river margin or a lake shore, warm enough for insects to move in the reeds, wet enough to take the shape of toes, firm enough that the print did not collapse before the next layer of silt covered it. Somewhere beyond the track, a body moved on 2 legs, balanced by a tail, its weight shifting forward with each step. The animal did not know it was leaving evidence. It was only crossing the ground. This is one of the quiet ways dinosaurs remain with us, not as monsters and not as symbols, but as pressure in mud, as mineral in bone, as a tooth broken from a jaw and carried into a river channel. Their rule was not written in crowns or borders. It was written in anatomy, in abundance, in the repeated fact that across much of the Mesozoic world, the largest herbivores on land were dinosaurs. The largest land predators were dinosaurs. And many of the smaller animals moving between roots and nests and stream banks were dinosaurs too. The title sounds simple: When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. But the Earth they ruled was not one world held still for them. It was a planet in motion for more than 160 million years, with continents splitting and drifting, oceans opening, sea levels rising and falling, forests changing, climates shifting, coastlines appearing and vanishing, and ecosystems rearranging themselves around bodies that could be no larger than a chicken or heavier than a whale. To follow that rule is not to watch one empire. It is to watch a long succession of worlds, each one temporary, each one leaving only fragments. If these journeys into the dinosaur age are why you return to Jurassical, subscribing keeps the next lost world close. The age of dinosaurs belongs to the Mesozoic Era, a span of time divided into the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. The Triassic began after the worst mass extinction in the history of life. The Jurassic followed another catastrophe, one that cleared many of the old rulers from land and sea. The Cretaceous ended with an impact that changed the direction of life on Earth. Between those boundaries, dinosaurs rose from small, lightly built animals on the margins of Triassic ecosystems into some of the most successful vertebrates the planet has ever produced. Rule, in this sense, does not mean that dinosaurs were everywhere, or that every ecosystem belonged to them alone. Mammals were present. Crocodile-line reptiles survived and remained important. Turtles, lizards, frogs, insects, pterosaurs, marine reptiles, fish, ammonites, plants, fungi, and countless smaller organisms made up the living world around them. Even on land, dinosaurs did not erase everything else. But from the late Triassic into the Cretaceous, they became the most visible and often the most dominant large animals in terrestrial ecosystems. The fossil record says this again and again, in bone beds, trackways, eggshells, and teeth. Their range was extraordinary. Some were long-necked herbivores with vertebrae full of air spaces, animals built lightly enough to carry necks longer than buses and bodies that pressed their tracks deep into floodplain mud. Some were armored low browsers with spikes, plates, or bony shields. Some had crests, horns, beaks, domed skulls, feathers, sickle claws, or battery-like rows of teeth. Some brooded nests. Some moved in groups. Some hunted alone. Some lived along rivers in humid forests. Others crossed semi-arid plains where seasonal drought turned ponds into traps. The Mesozoic did not begin gently. Before dinosaurs could become the animals that fill museum halls, before sauropods could reach into conifer canopies, before tyrannosaurs could stand over carcasses on late Cretaceous floodplains, the world had to recover from a deeper wound. At the start of the Triassic, the Earth was emerging from the end Permian extinction, a crisis that eliminated most marine species and devastated life on land. The survivors inherited a planet where ecosystems had been broken down and rebuilt under harsh, unstable conditions. Early Triassic landscapes would not have looked like classic dinosaur country. The continents were joined into Pangaea, a vast supercontinent stretching almost from pole to pole. Its interior was enormous and, in many places, dry, far from the moisture of the coast. Seasonal extremes shaped broad basins and floodplains. Rivers cut across red beds, lakes expanded and shrank. Winds moved dust over land, where the plant cover was often sparse compared with later Mesozoic forests. These were not yet the green Jurassic worlds that people imagine when they hear the word dinosaur. The animals that moved through those early Triassic places were strange in their own right. There were squat herbivores with heavy bodies and beaked mouths, predatory reptiles with sprawling or semi-upright limbs, survivors from older lineages carrying the anatomy of a previous age into a changed world. The ancestors of crocodiles were beginning to diversify. The first relatives of mammals were small, alert, often nocturnal animals that kept low to the ground. Dinosaurs were still in the future, but the conditions that would make them possible were already assembling, one recovery at a time. Dinosaurs appeared in the Triassic, probably in the middle part of the period, from small archosaur ancestors that stood with their limbs held more directly beneath the body than many earlier reptiles. This posture mattered. It allowed efficient movement, longer strides, and bodies carried above the ground rather than dragged close to it. The first dinosaurs were not giants. They were mostly small to medium-sized animals, light-footed, often bipedal, and only one part of a much broader reptile-dominated world. Their earliest success was not obvious from the beginning. Fossils from places such as South America and Africa show early dinosaurs living among other archosaurs that were, at the time, just as important or more important in many ecosystems. Animals like Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus do not look like rulers of the earth. They look like beginnings. Their bones show a combination of features that paleontologists use to recognize the dinosaur body plan, but their environments were shared with powerful competitors, including crocodile-line relatives that had already spread into carnivorous, herbivorous, and armored forms. A beginning can be hard to recognize while it is happening. In the Triassic, a small dinosaur stepping through a floodplain would not have seemed like the start of an age. It might have been avoiding larger predators, searching for insects or small vertebrates, or moving between patches of vegetation in a landscape where heat and drought shaped the rhythm of life. Its bones were hollow in places. Its legs were tucked underneath it. Its body was efficient. But nothing in that single animal required the future that would follow. Pangaea shaped everything. Because the continents were joined, animals could spread across enormous distances without crossing oceans. At the same time, the supercontinent created vast interiors where climates could become severe. Along the coasts, monsoon-like systems brought seasonal rains. Farther inland, dry basins and salt flats formed. The fossil record from this time is uneven, but it shows life testing many strategies in a world that had not yet settled into the ecosystems of the Jurassic and Cretaceous. Dinosaurs were part of that testing, not yet the full answer. Look at a Triassic trackway, and the picture becomes more immediate. 3-toed prints cross a bedding plane, some deeper than others, the stride changing where the animal slowed or the mud changed beneath it. A track does not preserve the color of skin or the sound of breathing, but it preserves motion. It tells you an animal passed through a real place, not an illustration, not a myth. The toes pressed down, the foot lifted, the mud held the shape. Then sediment arrived. Then time did the rest. By the late Triassic, Dinosaurs had diversified, but they still shared the land with many other successful groups. Large pseudosuchians, the crocodile line archosaurs, occupied roles that later people often associate with dinosaurs. Some were armored herbivores, some were apex predators, some walked with their bodies raised high on powerful limbs. In many late Triassic ecosystems, these animals were not leftovers or side characters. They were major components of the land fauna, and in some settings they may have been more conspicuous than dinosaurs themselves. That matters because dinosaur dominance was not inevitable. The fossil record does not support a simple story in which dinosaurs were always better and gradually pushed everything else aside. They survived, adapted, and expanded, but they did so in a world where chance and catastrophe played enormous roles. Success in one climate, one food web, or one continent does not guarantee survival when volcanism changes the atmosphere, when rainfall patterns shift, or when food chains collapse from the bottom upward. Near the end of the Triassic, the supercontinent began to tear open. Deep rifts formed where eastern North America would separate from northwestern Africa. Magma rose through fractures in the crust. Vast volcanic systems spread across what would become the margins of the Atlantic. These eruptions were not a single mountain exploding into the sky. They were repeated pulses of flood basalt, lava pouring across landscapes, gases entering the atmosphere, carbon moving through oceans and air, and ecosystems already under pressure being pushed beyond what many could survive. The end Triassic extinction removed a large portion of life on Earth. Many marine groups suffered. Reefs collapsed or weakened. On land, the large crocodile line archosaurs that had dominated many ecosystems were hit hard. The exact sequence of causes is still studied, but the connection with the Central Atlantic magmatic province is one of the major explanations. The eruptions likely changed climate, ocean chemistry, and atmospheric conditions over geologically short intervals. The result was not a clean replacement. It was a crisis. Dinosaurs were among the survivors. The reasons are still debated, and they were probably multiple. Some dinosaur lineages may have had metabolisms, growth rates, insulation, size ranges, or ecological flexibility that helped them endure unstable conditions. Some may simply have been in the right places at the right times. Extinction does not reward virtue or design. It filters life through circumstances. Many animals that disappear were well adapted until the world around them changed too quickly or too severely. After the boundary, the land was quieter in a way that can only be inferred. Not silent, not empty, but altered. Roles that had been filled for millions of years were open. Predator guilds were reduced. Herbivore communities shifted. Plant communities responded to climate and disturbance. Rivers still carried sand. Conifers still lifted branches into warm air. Small animals still moved through leaf litter. But the balance had changed, and dinosaurs were now positioned to expand into spaces that had not been available to them before. This is where the familiar image begins to form. Not immediately, and not everywhere at once, but gradually through the early Jurassic. Dinosaurs became larger. Their lineages branched. Long-necked herbivores began the long experiment that would lead to sauropod gigantism. Theropod predators increased in size and diversity. Ornithischian dinosaurs, the group that would later include stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, hadrosaurs, pachycephalosaurs, and horned dinosaurs, continued to develop their own paths through the recovering world. The Jurassic began about 201 million years ago and lasted until roughly 145 million years ago. It was not a single setting. Early Jurassic landscapes were still recovering from the extinction. Middle Jurassic ecosystems were changing as the continents continued to split. Late Jurassic environments held some of the most famous dinosaur communities ever found in rock. Over these tens of millions of years, dinosaur rule became visible in a way it had not been during the Triassic. The animals were not just surviving in the background, they were shaping the structure of ecosystems. Imagine a river basin in the early Jurassic. The channel curves through low ground, cutting into banks that slump after seasonal rains. ferns spread along wet margins. Conifers rise farther back where the soil is better drained. Cycads grow in open patches, their stiff leaves catching dust. A theropod moves along the bank, its feet narrow, its tail held out for balance. It pauses near the water, lowers its head, and leaves a print beside the track of a smaller animal that passed earlier in the day. The animals of this early Jurassic world were not yet the largest dinosaurs that would ever live. But the basic pattern was changing. Sauropodomorphs, already present in the Triassic, gave rise to true sauropods with column-like limbs, long necks, relatively small heads, and bodies capable of processing enormous volumes of vegetation. Their growth was one of the defining events in the history of land animals. No land mammals, not even the largest ancient rhinoceros relatives, ever reached the maximum sizes achieved by sauropods. Their size was not simply a matter of more food, it required anatomy that made large bodies possible. Sauropod bones, especially vertebrae, often contained air-filled spaces connected to a respiratory system related in broad principle to that of birds. These spaces reduced skeletal weight and helped support long necks without requiring solid bone on an impossible scale. Their heads stayed relatively small. Their teeth cropped plants rather than chewing them thoroughly. Food passed into a large digestive system where thyme and microbes could do much of the processing. A sauropod did not need to take delicate bites. It could strip branches, swallow, move, and keep feeding. A long neck let the animal reach vegetation while moving the heavy body less often. In some species, the neck may have swept low across broad feeding areas. In others, the shoulders and forelimbs suggest a higher browsing posture. Paleontologists still debate exact neck positions for different species, but the larger point remains clear. Sauropods used body design to solve the problem of feeding a body larger than anything else on land. When those bodies crossed mud, they changed the ground. A single foot could press deep into wet sediment, squeezing water upward around the toes. A herd crossing a floodplain could turn firm ground into churned tracks, overlapping circles and crescents, prints inside prints, the surface trampled by weight. In some places, those surfaces hardened before erosion erased them. Later layers sealed them away. Millions of years afterward, a quarry worker or paleontologist could uncover the underside of a vanished crossing and find the passage of giants still written there. Predators followed the herbivores. Early Jurassic theropods such as Dilophosaurus show the rise of larger carnivorous dinosaurs after the end Triassic extinction. Its paired crests were likely too delicate for combat and may have served display or species recognition. The animal was large compared with earlier dinosaurs, but not yet in the size range of later Jurassic apex predators. It belongs to a stage of the story when dinosaur food webs were becoming more complex, when carnivores were testing new proportions and new roles. A skull can reveal a life without preserving a moment. Tooth shape tells you how flesh was cut. Openings in the bone tell you where weight was reduced. Muscle scars suggest the forces of a bite. A healed injury shows that an animal survived pain long enough for bone to repair itself. In the Jurassic, predator and prey were not ideas. They were bodies meeting in floodplains, at carcasses, beside drying pools, in forests where visibility ended after a few trunks, and a movement in the understory could mean danger. The plants around them would have made the world feel both familiar and strange. There were trees, shade, trunks, roots, fallen branches, and green understories. But there were no grasses spreading across open plains, no flowers brightening the edges of streams, no fruit in the modern sense hanging from branches for birds and mammals to take. Jurassic plant life was dominated by gymnosperms and other ancient lineages, conifers, cycads, ginkgos, ferns, horsetails, and seed plants that belonged to a world before flowering plants became common. This matters because dinosaur bodies evolved in relation to those plants. Sauropods fed on tough vegetation that required large digestive systems. Stegosaurs likely browsed lower plants, with small heads and simple teeth suited to softer material. Small ornithischians may have clipped leaves closer to the ground. Food webs began with leaves, cones, spores, fallen needles, and decaying wood. The giants depended on forests, but the forests did not resemble the ones outside your window. They were green in another language. In a Jurassic forest after rain, water would bead on cycad leaves and run down the trunks of conifers. Fern fronds would lift under the weight of moisture. Insects would move through the litter, though the soundscape would lack the bees that depend so closely on flowering plants. A small dinosaur might pick through the damp ground for insects or shoots. Farther off, a sauropod could pull foliage from branches high enough that the forest itself seemed to move when the neck passed through it. Through the Middle Jurassic, dinosaur communities became more established, but the fossil record from this interval is less complete in many regions than the rocks of the Late Jurassic and Late Cretaceous. That unevenness matters. Our view of dinosaur rule is shaped by where sediment was deposited, where bones were buried quickly enough to fossilize, where later erosion exposed the right layers, and where people have searched. The past was full, but the record is partial. Every formation is a window, not the whole landscape. Still, even through that partial record, broad patterns are clear. Sauropods diversified. Theropods diversified with them. Early relatives of stegosaurs and other ornithischians spread through ecosystems where size, armor, speed, and behavior all offered different answers to predation. Pterosaurs moved through the skies, not dinosaurs, but close neighbors in the archosaur branch of life. In the seas, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs hunted in warm waters where ammonites, fish, belemnites, and marine invertebrates filled the food web. Dinosaur rule never meant the land stopped at the shore. The Mesozoic was also a world of shallow seas, island chains, lagoons, and coastlines that shifted as sea levels rose. A dinosaur track could be made on a coastal flat that later became limestone. A carcass could float into a channel, fall apart, and scatter bones across sand. Storms could bury nests or expose them. Ash from eruptions could settle over a landscape and fix a moment in a layer thin enough to hold between your fingers. The Jurassic oceans were ruled by reptiles, but not by dinosaurs. This distinction matters. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and later marine crocodile relatives were separate groups, adapted to water in ways dinosaurs, with rare exceptions near shorelines, never fully became. Yet their presence shaped the same age. While sauropods moved through floodplains and theropods hunted near rivers, long-necked plesiosaurs and fish-shaped ichthyosaurs pursued prey in seas that covered parts of continents. The age of dinosaurs was also an age of reptile experiments beyond land. Above those seas and forests, pterosaurs carried flight on membranes of skin supported by elongated fingers. They were not birds and not dinosaurs, but they shared the skies before birds became diverse. Some were small, with delicate bones and sharp teeth. Others would later become enormous. Their fossils are often fragile because hollow bones crush easily, but where preservation is fine enough. Pterosaurs show another part of the Mesozoic world, animals lifting from shorelines, gliding over water, landing near tracks that dinosaurs left in mud. Then, in the late Jurassic, feathers entered the story in a way the stone could not hide. Archaeopteryx, from the fine limestones of southern Germany, preserved a body with teeth, claws, a long bony tail, and feathers arranged for flight. It was not a modern bird placed in an ancient world. It was a dinosaur close to the origin of birds, carrying a mosaic of traits that show how one branch of theropods began to move into the air. Its feathers are not decoration in the fossil. They are evidence. Birds are living dinosaurs. That sentence can sound strange only because the word dinosaur has been held too tightly to extinction. In evolutionary terms, birds belong within theropod dinosaurs. The sparrow on a fence, the crow watching traffic, the gull standing in wind at a harbor, all carry a surviving branch of the dinosaur family tree. The non-avian dinosaurs vanished at the end of the Cretaceous. The avian dinosaurs did not. So the age of dinosaurs ended in one sense, but in another, it narrowed and continued. Before that narrowing, though, came the Cretaceous. The final period of the Mesozoic lasted from about 145 million years ago to 66 million years ago, longer than the entire time since the extinction that ended it. It was not simply an afterword to the Jurassic. It was a world of new continents, new coastlines, new plants, new dinosaur communities, and some of the most specialized animals the planet has ever known. Many dinosaurs that dominate popular imagination belong not to the Jurassic, but to the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous Earth was more divided than the world of the early Jurassic. Pangaea was gone as a single landmass. The Atlantic had opened wider. Southern continents that had once formed Gondwana were moving along their own paths. Sea levels were high, and shallow seas flooded continental interiors. In North America, a great seaway would eventually split the continent into western and eastern landmasses for long intervals. Isolation mattered. Populations separated by water, mountains, and distance evolved in their own directions. On one Cretaceous floodplain, a herd of hadrosaurs might move along a river, their broad beaks clipping plants and their dental batteries grinding food with a sophistication earlier herbivores did not possess. In another region, titanosaurs might pass between conifers and flowering shrubs, their long necks reaching above a landscape where plant communities were changing. Elsewhere, small feathered theropods moved through brush, alert and quick, part predator, part bird-like shadow, their bodies closer in outline to modern animals than old museum sculptures ever suggested. Flowering plants became more important during the Cretaceous. They did not instantly replace the older plant world, and for much of the period conifers, cycads, ferns, and other gymnosperms remained significant. But angiosperms diversified and spread, changing forest edges, riverbanks, understories, insect communities, and eventually the diets available to herbivores. This was one of the great ecological transitions of the Mesozoic. Dinosaurs lived through it, fed within it, and in some cases may have helped shape plant distribution through browsing and movement. It is easy to imagine the Cretaceous as a finished version of the dinosaur age, but it was still experimental. New kinds of herbivores emerged. Ceratopsians developed beaks, frills, and horns. Hadrosaurs evolved complex teeth and, in many species, elaborate crests. Ankylosaurs became walking fortresses with bony armor set into the skin and, in some lineages, heavy tail clubs. Tyrannosaurs, at first small and lightly built in their early history, eventually became the dominant large predators in parts of the northern hemisphere. None of this happened all at once. The rise of tyrannosaurs is a story of patience written over tens of millions of years. Early members of the broader tyrannosaur lineage were not the rulers people picture. Many were small to medium-sized predators, some with long arms, some with feathers, living alongside other theropods that held the apex roles. Only later, especially in the late Cretaceous, after other large predator groups declined in certain regions, did tyrannosaurs grow into the massive animals represented by Tyrannosaurus rex and its relatives. Their dominance was earned late. A Tyrannosaurus skull is not delicate. It is deep, reinforced, and built around force. The teeth are thick and banana-shaped, not just blades for slicing, but tools capable of puncturing and crushing. The eye sockets, jaw joints, and snout proportions all speak of an animal whose head was the main weapon. Its arms were short, but its neck, torso, legs, and skull made the entire front of the animal into an instrument of impact and bite. It did not need to be elegant to be effective. Still, even Tyrannosaurus was part of an ecosystem, not a solitary emblem placed on a blank stage. It lived with horned dinosaurs, hadrosaurs, ankylosaurs, small theropods, mammals, turtles, crocodilians, fish, pterosaurs, insects, and plants. It walked on ground shaped by rivers and seasons. Its bones show growth, injury, infection, healed wounds, and age. Fossils do not give it a roar. They give it a body. The drama is not that it was a monster. The drama is that it was real. A shed tooth from such an animal can be small enough to hold in your palm. It might be worn at the tip, serrations still visible along the edges. The root absent because the tooth fell from the jaw during life or broke loose after death. That tooth can tell you about feeding, replacement, diet, and the presence of a predator in the same layer as the bones of its prey. It is a small thing, but through it a late Cretaceous riverbank comes back into focus. Herbivores were no less remarkable. Hadrosaurs, often called duck-billed dinosaurs, were among the most successful plant-eating dinosaurs of the late Cretaceous. Their jaws contained dental batteries made of many replacement teeth packed together, forming grinding surfaces that could process tough vegetation efficiently. Some had crests that may have helped produce sound, display identity, or distinguish species. Their fossils are common in some deposits, suggesting that in the right environments, they were abundant animals moving through floodplains in groups. A hadrosaur trackway can feel almost modern at first. The broad three-toed hindprints move across a surface with steady rhythm. Sometimes smaller prints appear nearby, suggesting younger animals or different species crossing the same ground. In places where skin impressions preserve, the scales show polygonal patterns, not a vague reptilian blur, but a real texture, pebbled and varied across the body. A dinosaur becomes harder to reduce to a silhouette when the skin itself is there in the stone. Ceratopsians developed another answer to life under pressure. Early members of the group were small, often bipedal animals in Asia. Later forms became large quadrupeds with beaks, shearing teeth, frills, and horns. Triceratops, one of the last non-avian dinosaurs, lived at the end of the Cretaceous in western North America. Its skull was enormous, its brow horns long, its frill broad, and its beak suited to cropping vegetation. The frill may have played roles in muscle attachment, display, species recognition, and combat. The horns were real weapons, but they were also social signals. Fossils of ceratopsians show injuries and variation that suggest complex lives. Some skulls preserve damage consistent with horn-to-horn contact, or impacts. Some bone beds preserve many individuals, raising questions about herd behavior, drought deaths, floods, or seasonal gathering. Paleontologists must be careful here, because a pile of bones is not automatically a herd, and a healed wound is not automatically a duel. But the evidence does show animals interacting with each other and their environments in ways that were more than simple feeding and fleeing. Ankylosaurs took a different path. They lowered the body, widened the torso, embedded armor into the skin, and in some lineages evolved tail clubs capable of delivering heavy blows. Their skulls were broad, their teeth small, their bodies protected by osteoderms that formed shields over the back, sides, and sometimes eyelids. An adult ankylosaur would have been a difficult animal to attack. A predator approaching from behind could meet a swinging club. A bite into the back might strike armor before flesh. Survival was built into the surface of the body. On southern continents, titanosaurs carried the sauropod story into the Cretaceous with extraordinary success. Some were modest by sauropod standards, others were among the largest land animals ever known. Their fossils appear across South America, Africa, India, Europe, and other regions, showing how long-necked giants continued after many Jurassic sauropod groups had changed or declined. Titanosaur nests and eggs from certain deposits give rare glimpses of reproduction, round eggs in clusters, embryos in some cases, nesting grounds used by animals whose adult bodies were far larger than the eggs suggest. An eggshell fragment is easy to overlook. It can look like a small curved piece of pale stone, textured under magnification, broken by pressure or weathering. But it belongs to one of the most intimate parts of the dinosaur story. Before a giant had weight, before a predator had teeth, before a herd had tracks, there was an egg in sediment, warmed by environment, guarded or buried or left in a nesting ground depending on the species. The age of dinosaurs was also an age of nests. Nesting evidence has changed how dinosaurs are understood. Some theropods appear to have brooded eggs in positions similar in broad outline to birds. Certain oviraptorosaurs have been found associated with nests, their arms arranged around clutches. Bone beds and nesting colonies suggest that at least some species return to nesting areas or laid eggs in groups. Growth rings in bones reveal how quickly young animals developed. The fossil record does not let us watch parental care directly, but it gives enough evidence to show that reproduction was varied and often more complex than older assumptions allowed. Juvenile dinosaurs lived in a different world from adults. A young sauropod was not yet too large to attack. A young tyrannosaur had different proportions from a full-grown one, with longer legs and a lighter skull. A young hadrosaur moved through plants at a height where different predators could reach it. Dinosaur ecosystems were layered not only by species, but by age. The same animal changed ecological role as it grew, altering what it ate, what threatened it, and how it moved through the landscape. In a Cretaceous morning, mist might rise from a river channel while insects collect on wet leaves. A hadrosaur herd moves slowly through the low ground, adults pushing into vegetation, juveniles keeping close where paths are already opened. Beyond the trees, a tyrannosaur does not charge in a straight line like a scene made for spectacle. It waits, watches, smells, moves when there is reason to move. Most of life is not attack. Most of life is hunger, caution, heat, irritation, rest, and the need to keep going. That restraint is important. Dinosaur rule was not a constant battle. Predation mattered, but ecosystems are not built from attacks alone. They are built from feeding, digestion, growth, reproduction, migration, decay, competition, seasonal stress, disease, drought, flood, fire, and chance. A sauropod feeding for hours changes vegetation. A carcass feeds insects, small vertebrates, microbes, and scavengers. A flood buries bones. A dry season concentrates animals around shrinking water. The fossil record catches some of these processes, but most of them happened without leaving a clear trace. Sometimes, the trace is violence. A tooth embedded in bone. A puncture, a tailspike wound that healed. A limb broken and repaired. Bite marks around a carcass where meat was stripped from bone. These are not decorations added to make the past exciting. They are data. They show contact between animals, the mechanics of feeding, the cost of survival. The Mesozoic was alive, and living systems are never gentle for long. Sometimes the trace is calm. A line of footprints crossing a dried surface. Raindrop impressions preserved beside tracks. Ripple marks left by shallow water. A fern pressed flat into fine sediment. A feather outline dark against pale limestone. A nest hollow in sand. These quieter fossils matter just as much because they return the dinosaurs to environments, to weather, to small circumstances that do not need to become dramatic in order to be meaningful. To say dinosaurs ruled the Earth is to say that for an immense span of time, they were woven into nearly every terrestrial setting where large vertebrates could thrive. They crossed deserts and floodplains. They fed in forests without flowers, and later in landscapes where flowers were spreading. They nested on river margins, left tracks on tidal flats, died in droughts, drowned in floods, survived injuries, grew through seasons, and evolved again and again into forms that no mammal has ever repeated. The clearest way into that span is often not through a complete skeleton, but through a place. A quarry face in the American West, with bones appearing as pale arcs in darker rock. A limestone slab in Germany, fine-grained enough to hold feathers. A desert exposure in Mongolia, where wind uncovers eggs and skulls from sandstones that once held dunes and seasonal streams. A cliff in Patagonia, where the vertebrae of a titanosaur emerge one after another, each bone too large to feel ordinary even before the animal is reconstructed. Dinosaur fossils form only under certain conditions. A dead animal has to be buried quickly enough to protect bone from scavenging, weathering, and decay. Mineral-rich water has to move through the remains. Sediment has to become rock without destroying every detail. Then, much later, uplift and erosion have to expose the layer again. And someone has to notice. This is why the fossil record is uneven. It favors floodplains, river channels, lake beds, volcanic ash falls, coastal flats, and places where burial could happen faster than destruction. That unevenness shapes the story. We know some dinosaur communities in extraordinary detail because the rocks are generous. Others must have existed with equal richness, but left almost nothing. Tropical environments often destroy bone quickly. Mountain regions erode or deform sediment. Forest soils can be poor places for preservation. So when we speak of dinosaur dominance, we are speaking through a record that has gaps, biases, and silences. The pattern remains strong, but it is still assembled from what survived. A museum skeleton can make the past look clean. The bones are mounted, labeled, lit from below, separated from the mud, smell, heat, and insects that once surrounded them. The animal becomes an outline in a hall. But every bone in that skeleton began somewhere messier. It belonged inside muscle, under skin, attached to tendons, warmed by blood. It was carried by a living animal through a world with weather. The skeleton is not the dinosaur. It is what the Earth kept after everything soft was taken away. In the Triassic, the first dinosaur bodies were small enough that many could have moved through dense vegetation without forcing paths. Their hip structure, ankle joints, and upright limbs gave them efficient locomotion. Some were carnivorous or omnivorous. Others moved toward herbivory. The three great dinosaur lineages were beginning to separate: theropods, sauropodomorphs, and ornithischians. These names would later contain almost every familiar dinosaur body plan, but in the Triassic, they were still close to the base of their histories. The world around them remained dangerous in ways that would be easy to forget if the story were told only from the large Rauisuchian and other Pseudosuchian predators held top roles in some ecosystems. A small dinosaur was not guaranteed survival by being a dinosaur. It had to avoid jaws, find food, reproduce, endure drought, and live long enough for its lineage to continue. For millions of years, dinosaur history was a story of persistence beside competitors that could easily have remained dominant under different circumstances. Evolution does not know where it is going. No Triassic animal was trying to become a symbol of deep time. No lineage was aiming toward Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Brachiosaurus, or a bird landing on a telephone. Traits that worked in one moment were carried forward into the next, modified, lost, or exaggerated. The future becomes visible only from far away. Inside the time itself, life is local, immediate, and practical. The end Triassic crisis changed that local reality on a planetary scale. Carbon dioxide from volcanic activity likely contributed to warming. Sulfur gases may have caused short-term cooling pulses and acid rain. Ocean acidification stressed shell-building organisms. Plants changed as climate zones shifted. Food webs were pressed from several sides. The animals that vanished did not all disappear in one instant, but on the scale of deep time, the transition was abrupt enough to remake ecosystems. Afterward, dinosaurs expanded into predator and herbivore roles at larger sizes than before. The early Jurassic record shows theropods increasing in importance and sauropodomorphs moving toward the giant body plan. Some older Triassic-style animals persisted in reduced forms or different niches, but the major terrestrial communities were reorganizing. This was not the moment when every famous dinosaur appeared. It was the foundation beneath them, the stage where ecological opportunity and dinosaur anatomy began working together. The ground itself was changing too. Pangea continued to fracture. Rifts widened into basins. Lakes formed in troughs where sediment accumulated layer after layer. In eastern North America, red beds and lake deposits recorded seasons, footprints, fish, plants, and volcanic influence. Elsewhere, shallow seas advanced over low continental margins. A dinosaur walking across a rift basin could not know that the same tectonic process shaping its river valleys was opening an ocean that would still widen in the human age. The Jurassic climate was generally warm, though not uniform and not static. There were regional differences, seasonal patterns, and intervals of stress. Without permanent polar ice caps for much of the Mesozoic, sea levels could be high, and warm shallow seas spread across continental shelves. On land, humidity supported forests in many areas, while other regions remained more open or seasonally dry. Dinosaurs lived within this variety. Their rule was never a single climate stamped across the globe. In the late Jurassic, one of the most famous windows opens in the Morrison Formation of western North America. These rocks record rivers, floodplains, lakes, seasonal wetlands, and drier intervals across a vast region. They hold the bones of sauropods, theropods, stegosaurs, small ornithischians, crocodile relatives, turtles, fish, mammals, and plants. The formation does not represent one frozen moment. It represents time stacked in sediment, ecosystems changing across landscapes that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The Morrison animals are familiar because their fossils have been collected and studied for more than a century. Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, Allosaurus, Stegosaurus, Ceratosaurus, and others all come from this broader world. The names can make them seem like a cast assembled for a single scene, but they were spread across time and space within the formation. Some overlapped closely. Others may have been separated by geography or by hundreds of thousands of years. A formation is not a zoo. It is a library of landscapes. Still, there were days when several of them may have shared the same basin. A river lowers during a dry season. Sauropods move toward remaining water, their feet breaking crusted mud. Smaller herbivores feed near the bank. A Stegosaurus browses low plants, tail angled away from approaching danger. Allosaurus tracks appear along the edge of the channel, not as a charging spectacle, but as a line of careful movement. Above them, pterosaurs pass over the water, their shadows sliding across ripples. Sauropod diversity in such ecosystems likely reflected different feeding strategies. Diplodocus had a long, low skull with peg-like teeth at the front of the jaws, suggesting a feeding style that may have involved stripping or cropping vegetation. Camarasaurus had a deeper skull and more robust teeth, perhaps able to handle tougher plant matter. Brachiosaur relatives carried forelimbs longer than hind limbs, lifting the shoulder region and changing the reach of the neck. These differences reduced direct competition by dividing food resources vertically and mechanically. The idea that all sauropods did the same thing because they all had long necks is too simple. Long necks were tools used in different ways. Some species may have fed high in trees. Others may have swept through lower vegetation with minimal movement of the body. Some may have shifted diets with age. Their teeth, skulls, neck vertebrae, limb proportions, and wear patterns offer clues. The details are debated, but the variety is not. Jurassic giant herbivores were not copies of one design. Their growth must have been astonishing. A sauropod hatched from an egg far smaller than the adult body would suggest, then passed through years of rapid increase, adding bone and muscle at rates recorded in microscopic structures inside fossilized limbs. Growth rings, vascular canals, and bone tissue reveal active, fast-growing animals. To become enormous, a sauropod had to solve not only adult weight, but juvenile vulnerability. Many hatchlings and juveniles must have died before reaching the size at which few predators could challenge them. For predators, those juveniles mattered. An adult sauropod was a dangerous prospect. A young one was food. Theropods did not need to kill healthy giants every day to live in sauropod country. They could target the small, the weak, the old, the trapped, and the dead. Scavenging and hunting likely blurred together, as they do for many modern predators. A carcass on a floodplain would have drawn animals from distance, large theropods tearing flesh, smaller predators waiting, insects arriving first and staying longest. Bite marks on sauropod bones tell part of that story: a tooth scrape across a rib, a puncture near a joint, damage on bones that had already lost their flesh, or marks made while meat still clung to the body. These traces are difficult to interpret in detail, but they keep the animals connected. Predator and prey were not separate displays in separate museum halls. Their lives touched, sometimes violently, sometimes after death, sometimes in ways preserved only as scratches on mineralized bone. Allosaurus was among the most successful late Jurassic large theropods in North America. Its skull was lighter than that of a tyrannosaur, with large openings reducing weight. Its teeth were serrated blades suited to cutting. Its forelimbs were functional, ending in claws that may have helped grip prey or carcasses. Its jaws and neck have been studied for possible feeding strategies, including powerful downward strikes and flesh-ripping motions. The exact behavior remains debated, but the animal was clearly an effective predator in its environment. It is tempting to describe Allosaurus as a simple precursor to Tyrannosaurus, but that misleads. It belonged to a different branch of theropods and lived in different ecosystems more than 80 million years earlier. It was not a failed version of a later predator. It was an answer to a late Jurassic world of sauropods, stegosaurs, and mid-sized herbivores. Its success should be measured by its own time, not by comparison with an animal it never met. A healed puncture in an Allosaurus bone or a damaged vertebra from another dinosaur can make that time feel close. Injury was part of the landscape. A predator could break ribs while attacking. A herbivore could carry wounds from a bite. A tail spike could enter bone. Infection could follow. Many animals survived damage that would have changed how they moved for the rest of their lives. Fossils do not preserve pain, but they preserve repair, and repair means the animal lived after the violence. Stegosaurus moved through this same world with its own answer to danger. The plates along its back remain among the most recognizable structures in dinosaur anatomy, but their purpose was probably not simple armor. Their position, shape, and vascular structure suggest roles in display, species recognition, and possibly heat exchange. They made the animal visible, perhaps to mates, rivals, and predators. The tail spikes, by contrast, were direct and practical. They were weapons placed exactly where a pursuing predator could be punished. The tail spike cluster of Stegosaurus is often called a thagomizer, a name that began as a joke but became useful because it describes a real anatomical feature. Fossil evidence supports the defensive function. A puncture wound in an Allosaurus vertebra matches the size and shape expected from a Stegosaurus tail spike. The bone shows signs of healing, meaning the predator survived the blow. That single injury is one of the clearest fossil conversations between two famous dinosaurs. One attacked or came too close. The other answered with bone-piercing force. Picture the animal not as a slow museum silhouette, but as a heavy herbivore aware of its body. The head stays low. The back rises toward the hips. Plates catch light along the spine. The tail moves behind like a loaded pendulum. A predator does not need to understand the anatomy in human terms. It only needs experience. One wrong approach could mean a spike driven into muscle, ribs, or belly. In a world without medicine, even a survivable wound could become a death sentence later. Stegosaurs were only one branch of ornithischian dinosaurs. Other herbivorous forms were smaller, faster, less armored, and likely more dependent on alertness and movement. Small ornithopods, for example, appear in many Jurassic and Cretaceous ecosystems. They could browse low vegetation, move quickly, and reproduce in numbers that helped sustain predator populations. Because their bones were smaller and more fragile, they are sometimes less famous than the giants. But their ecological role may have been substantial. Ecosystems need small and medium herbivores as much as spectacular ones. Fame in paleontology is not the same as abundance in life. Large skeletons draw attention because they survive more often and impress people when mounted, But the Mesozoic ground would also have held small bodies moving between roots, hatchlings hiding near cover, mammals passing at night, lizards warming on logs, insects feeding on leaves, and amphibians calling from water margins. Dinosaur rule existed in that crowded setting. It did not flatten the world into only giants. The Jurassic also held places where preservation was fine enough to record delicacy. The Solnhofen limestones of Germany formed in lagoonal environments where fine carbonate mud could settle in quiet water. These deposits preserved not only bones, but impressions of soft tissues, wings, feathers, and the outlines of animals that would normally vanish. Archaeopteryx is famous from these rocks, but the same broader setting preserves pterosaurs, fish, marine invertebrates, and other organisms that reveal a coastal world of islands, lagoons, and restricted basins. A feather in limestone changes the scale of the story. It is not huge. It does not shake the ground. It can be seen as a dark imprint, a pattern of veins and shaft, a structure built for air. Yet it links the dinosaur age to the present more directly than any giant femur. Feathers began before birds as insulation, display, or sensory structures in certain theropods, then became part of flight in avian lineages. The pathway from ground to air was not a leap. It was a long repurposing. Archaeopteryx was not simply the first bird in a neat ladder leading to modern species. It was one of several early avialans, or close bird relatives, near the base of a branching evolutionary tree. It had feathers and wings, but also teeth, clawed fingers, and a long bony tail. Later discoveries, especially from China, have revealed many feathered dinosaurs and early birds, showing that the origin of flight was more complicated and widespread than older fossil records suggested. Evolution does not move in a straight line. While some theropods took to the air, others remained firmly terrestrial and continued to refine predation on land. This split within theropods is one of the most important facts in the dinosaur story. The same broad group produced both animals that could tear flesh from sauropod carcasses and animals that would eventually give rise to songbirds. Anatomy shifted through many intermediate forms, feathers first serving non-flight functions, arms changing proportions, wishbones strengthening, tails shortening in some lineages, bodies becoming smaller and more aerial. A living bird can make the Mesozoic feel less sealed away. Watch the feet of a crow on pavement, the toes spread, grip, and release. Watch the head movements, the alertness, the body held above thin legs, the feathers adjusted by small motions. It is not a velociraptor in disguise, and it is not a miniature Tyrannosaurus. It is its own living animal. But it is also part of the dinosaur story continuing in a form that survived the fire at the end. The transition into the Cretaceous did not erase the Jurassic world overnight. Many lineages crossed the boundary. Some changed gradually. Some disappeared regionally. Sauropods continued, though different groups rose and fell. Theropod communities shifted. Ornithischians diversified in new ways. The period boundaries used by geologists are real tools based on rock and time, but living animals did not experience them as titles. A dinosaur near the Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary lived in its local climate, ate local plants, avoided local predators, and never knew it occupied a named transition. In the early Cretaceous, some landscapes still carried a Jurassic feeling. Conifers and ferns remained common. Pterosaurs still crossed the sky. Large theropods hunted in many regions. Sauropods moved through floodplains. But new elements became more visible. Flowering plants began to appear more often in the fossil record and eventually diversified. Small feathered dinosaurs in certain ecosystems show striking variety. Birds became more diverse. Continental separation deepened regional differences, making the dinosaur world less unified than it had been when Pangaea was intact. The Cretaceous is long enough to contain several different dinosaur worlds. Early Cretaceous ecosystems in Liaoning, with lakes, volcanic ash, feathered dinosaurs, early birds, mammals, fish, differ sharply from late Cretaceous floodplains in Montana or Alberta. North African river systems with giant theropods and fish-rich waters differed from Mongolian desert basins with nesting dinosaurs and sandstorm deposits. A single period contained humid forests, coastal plains, inland deserts, island habitats, polar regions with seasonal darkness, and seaways full of marine. Polar dinosaurs are among the most revealing. Fossils from high-latitude regions show that dinosaurs lived in places with long seasonal changes in light. The Mesozoic poles were warmer than modern polar regions, but they were not tropical in the simple sense. Winters could be dark for long periods. Plants responded to seasons. Animals may have migrated, endured, or adapted to cooler temperatures depending on species and region. The presence of dinosaurs in these environments shows that their success was not limited to warm lowlands. Evidence for feathers and insulation also affects how we imagine these animals. Not all dinosaurs were feathered, and large scaly skin impressions are known for many groups. But many theropods had feathers or filament-like coverings, and some other dinosaur groups may have had simple body coverings as well. This does not mean every dinosaur looked like a bird. It means skin was varied. Some bodies were scaly, some feathered, some probably mixed, with different coverings across age, species, and body region. The old image of dinosaurs as uniformly sluggish, swamp-bound reptiles has been gone for a long time, but replacing it with a single opposite image would also be wrong. Dinosaurs were not all fast, warm, feathered, intelligent, social animals. They were diverse. Some may have been active and alert. Some were huge and slow compared with smaller animals. Some likely had complex social behaviors. Others may have been solitary for much of life. Their biology cannot be flattened into one correction. The fossil record asks for variety. One of the most powerful Cretaceous examples of that variety is Spinosaurus and its relatives, theropods associated with fish-rich environments and unusual skulls. Their long, crocodile-like jaws, conical teeth, and other anatomical features suggest diets that included aquatic prey. The exact posture, swimming ability, and lifestyle of Spinosaurus remain debated, and new discoveries have changed reconstructions more than once. What matters for the broader story is that even large predatory dinosaurs were not all built for the same kind of hunting on open land. Carcharodontosaurids, abelisaurids, spinosaurids, dromaeosaurs, troodontids, tyrannosaurs, and other theropod groups occupied different places in Cretaceous ecosystems. Some were apex predators, some were small, fast hunters. Some may have been omnivorous. Some had specialized claws or skulls. Some carried extensive feathers. Their diversity reflects the length and geographic complexity of the period. Dinosaur rule was not held by one predator type across the globe. It was distributed among many lineages responding to local conditions. A small dromaeosaur track in mud can be just as important as a giant skeleton. It shows the presence of an animal whose bones might never be found there. The toes, the stride, the depth of the print, and the sediment around it all preserve a brief contact with the ground. Trackways can show speed, group movement, turning, limping, or behavior near water. They remind us that fossils are not only remains of death, some are records of life passing through. On a Cretaceous lake margin in northeastern China, volcanic ash could fall softly enough to bury fine details. In those deposits, feather impressions surround skeletons of small theropods. Some animals preserve long feathers on arms and tails. Some show filaments over the body. Color studies in certain fossils have even suggested patterns based on microscopic pigment structures, though such interpretations require caution. The old stone does not merely tell us that feathers existed. In rare cases, it begins to show how they were arranged. Feathers did not evolve for flight alone. Simple filamentous coverings could provide insulation. Larger or more complex feathers could function in display, brooding, camouflage, tactile sensing, or aerodynamic behaviors before true powered flight. In evolution, structures often gain new uses after originating for other reasons. The wing of a bird is not the sudden invention of a flying animal. It is a modified forelimb, layered with feathers whose history began earlier and broader than flight itself. That history makes the end of the dinosaur age more complicated. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, it did not wipe out all dinosaurs. It eliminated the non-avian branches, the great and small lineages that had dominated land ecosystems for more than 160 million years. But avian dinosaurs survived, though many bird lineages also vanished. The survivors carried the only living dinosaur lineage into the Cenozoic. Extinction was enormous, but it was not absolute. Before the impact, late Cretaceous ecosystems were not declining everywhere in a simple, universal way. Some dinosaur faunas show changes and regional stresses. Sea levels shifted. Volcanism in India produced the Deccan Traps, a major environmental factor under study. Plant communities changed. But dinosaurs remained diverse and ecologically important right up to the end in many places. The idea of a world already emptying before the asteroid is too simple. The final blow landed on living, functioning ecosystems. The impact itself occurred near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. A body roughly around 10 kilometers wide struck Earth with energy beyond human experience. Rock vaporized. Shockwaves moved through crust. Debris entered the atmosphere. Fires may have spread over vast regions. Sunlight was reduced as dust, aerosols, and soot affected the sky. Photosynthesis collapsed in many environments. Food webs that depended on plants and plankton were thrown into crisis. The world changed faster than most large animals could adjust. Imagine the last day of the Cretaceous, not as one seen everywhere, but as a disturbance radiating through connected systems. Near the impact, destruction was immediate. Far away, the consequences arrived as darkness, cold, acid rain, disrupted seasons, failing plants, collapsing food chains, and starvation. A triceratops on a floodplain did not need to see the crater to live under its effects. A hadrosaur herd thousands of kilometers away could be doomed by the disappearance of food. A small bird might survive because it could shelter, eat seeds, or endure scarcity in ways a large dinosaur could not. Survival after the impact depended on many factors: body size, diet, habitat, growth rate, reproduction, sheltering behavior, geographic location, and chance all likely mattered. Freshwater ecosystems seem to have provided refuges for some animals. Seeds and detritus may have sustained certain food chains. Small size helped many survivors require less food. Birds that lived through the extinction were not simply lucky in one way. They were filtered through a disaster that favored certain combinations of traits while destroying others. A world without non-avian dinosaurs did not become quiet. Insects continued. Crocodilians remained. Turtles survived. Mammals emerged from smaller roles into new possibilities. Birds diversified. Forests regrew. Rivers carried bones into new sediments. But the old shape of terrestrial life was gone. No more sauropod herds crossing floodplains. No more horned dinosaurs scraping vegetation with beaks. No more tyrannosaurs leaving heavy tracks along river margins. The ecological architecture of land had been rebuilt again, this time without them. Their rule, then, was bounded by catastrophes. It rose after extinctions and ended in one. That does not make it fragile. It makes it part of Earth history. Life does not rule the planet by escaping geology. It rules within geology, for as long as climate, continents, oceans, chemistry, and chance allow. Dinosaurs were spectacular not because they defeated change, but because they flourished through so much of it. They crossed a planet remaking itself and remained central for longer than any human institution can make sense of. The Triassic gave them origin and opportunity. The Jurassic gave them expansion, giants, classic ecosystems, and the early steps toward birds. The Cretaceous gave them regional diversity, flowering plant worlds, specialized herbivores, late-rising tyrannosaurs, complex nesting evidence, polar habitats, and the final boundary. Each period matters. Remove one, and the phrase dinosaur age becomes a flattened image instead of a deep history. Return to the footprint. It could belong to a small Triassic dinosaur moving beside competitors that would soon vanish. It could belong to a Jurassic theropod following a river channel through conifers and cycads. It could belong to a Cretaceous hadrosaur crossing soft ground near flowering shrubs. The shape alone may not tell the whole story, but the stone around it can. Grain size, ripple marks, mud cracks, associated fossils, and layer position turn a print into a place. Paleontologists read these clues together. Bones give anatomy. Tracks give movement. Eggs give reproduction. Teeth give feeding. Coprolites can preserve diet. Isotopies can suggest temperature, migration, or water sources. Microscopic bone structure reveals growth. CT scans expose cavities hidden inside skulls. Sedimentology reconstructs rivers, deserts, lakes, shorelines, and volcanic events. The dinosaur age is not recovered by imagination alone. Imagination helps us enter it, but evidence sets the walls of the room. That is why a good fossil does not feel like a fantasy object. It feels stubborn. A femur has weight. A tooth has edges. A track has depth. A nest has arrangement. These things resist being turned into whatever story we prefer. They ask for patience. They allow wonder, but they also correct it. The animals were stranger than old guesses, and often more interesting than exaggeration. They do not need to be made mythical. Their reality is enough. Consider the scale of their time another way. The distance between Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus is greater than the distance between Tyrannosaurus and the modern world. Those two famous dinosaurs did not share a landscape. They did not hear the same insects, feed on the same plants, or stand beneath the same arrangement of continents. One belongs to late Jurassic ecosystems, the other to the very end of the Cretaceous. Human imagination often places them together, because museum halls can place them only a few rooms apart. Deep time keeps them separated by more than 80 million years. This is why the dinosaur age needs movement. Without movement, it becomes a poster of familiar animals standing in a single impossible plane. With movement, the story becomes richer. A Triassic animal with a light body and long tail gives way to Jurassic giants that reshape the meaning of size. Those giants coexist with plated herbivores and slicing predators. Later, Cretaceous continents isolate populations. Flowering plants spread. Horned dinosaurs develop skulls like shields and billboards, and tyrannosaurs become the dominant predators only near the end in certain regions. The reign was long enough for entire worlds to replace one another. A child looking at a skeleton often asks who would win in a fight. The rocks usually answer different questions. Where was the river? How fast did the animal grow? Did it live long enough for a wound to heal? Did the eggshell break before burial or after? Were these bones transported by water? Did this tooth fall out during feeding? The past becomes more real when the question shifts from spectacle to circumstance. A dinosaur's life was made of circumstances. In the late Cretaceous of Western North America, the western interior seaway divided the continent for to the west was Laramidia, a narrow landmass along the rising mountains. To the east was Appalachia, less well sampled in the fossil record. This division helped create regional dinosaur faunas. In Laramidia, fossil-bearing rocks from Alberta, Montana, Utah, New Mexico, and nearby regions reveal a changing sequence of hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, tyrannosaurs, ankylosaurs, and other animals through time. Picture Laramidia as a long strip of land between mountains and sea. Rivers carried sediment eastward from rising highlands. Floodplains spread across low ground. Seasonal rains filled channels and ponds. Volcanic ash sometimes dusted the landscape and later became datable layers. Near the seaway, coastal plains held swamps, deltas, and brackish environments. Farther inland, forests and open areas shifted with drainage and climate. Dinosaurs moved through this strip for millions of years, Their fossils stacked in formations that now let paleontologists trace change almost like chapters. The details vary by formation and interval. The Dinosaur Park Formation in Alberta preserves one kind of late Cretaceous community, rich in horned dinosaurs, hadrosaurs, tyrannosaurs, ankylosaurs, and smaller animals. The Hell Creek Formation, closer to the end of the Cretaceous, preserves another, with Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, Ankylosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus, and others. These communities are not interchangeable. They belong to different times and environments within the same final period, and their differences are part of the story. In Hell Creek landscapes, the end was near, though no animal could know it. Rivers wound through warm, temperate floodplains. Forests contained conifers, flowering plants, ferns, and palms or palm-like plants depending on habitat. Turtles and crocodilians lived in waterways. Mammals moved mostly in smaller roles. Triceratops browsed with a skull heavy enough to dominate the front half of the body. Edmontosaurus moved in herds or groups across open ground. Tyrannosaurus crossed the same terrain, its presence recorded by teeth, bones, and enormous three-toed tracks. The last dinosaurs were not primitive remnants waiting to disappear. They were highly evolved animals at the ends of long lineages. Triceratops was not an early horned dinosaur. It was a late one. Tyrannosaurus was not an ancestral predator. It was a specialized late tyrannosaur. Edmontosaurus was not a simple duckbill. It belonged to a group with sophisticated chewing apparatus and complex life histories. Ankylosaurus was an endpoint of armored evolution. The final world was not exhausted of invention. It was still producing remarkable bodies. Hadrosaurs deserve more attention than their nickname gives them. Duck-billed suggests something almost gentle or comic, but their anatomy was finely tuned. The front of the mouth formed a broad cropping surface. Behind it, dental batteries processed vegetation with repeated replacement teeth. Some species carried hollow crests connected to nasal passages, which may have shaped calls or served display. Their limbs suggest animals capable of both quadrupedal feeding and bipedal movement in some contexts. They were among the great herbivore success stories of the late Cretaceous. A herd of large hadrosaurs moving together would have been a landscape event. Feet press into wet sediment, tails swing above low plants. Air moves through crests and throats. Juveniles keep pace in gaps between adults. The group feeds, lifts heads, shifts direct, and leaves behind a trampled surface that can harden into a map of passage. If buried quickly, that surface becomes more than a trackway. It becomes evidence of a social moment, though the exact behavior must be read with care. Trackways that appear parallel may suggest group movement, but paleontologists must distinguish true association from repeated use of the same surface over time. Bone beds with many individuals may reflect herding, drought, flood transport, predator accumulation, or long-term deposition. Fossils invite interpretation, but they also punish certainty when the evidence is thin. Good dinosaur science often moves in cautious phrases. May have, suggests, is consistent with, probably in some species, in this deposit. Restraint is not weakness. It is what keeps the reconstruction honest. The uncertainty has its own atmosphere. It lets the stone remain stone. Not every track becomes a chase. Not every nest becomes parental tenderness. Not every wound becomes a duel. Some fossils hold only enough to tell us that an animal lived, moved, fed, and died in a place now gone. That can be enough. The distance is part of the truth. Ceratopsian skulls provide some of the most dramatic evidence for display and species identity among dinosaurs. Frills and horns varied greatly across species. Some had long brow horns, others short ones. Some had elaborate spikes along the frill margin. Some had nasal horns enlarged, reduced, or differently shaped. These structures likely served multiple roles, including visual recognition, mate choice, combat, and defense. Like antlers, horns, and crests in living animals, They were expensive features that carried information as well as mechanical function. A ceratopsian skull in rock can appear almost architectural. The beak curves at the front. Tooth rows sit deep behind the jaw margins. The frill spreads backward in a broad shield of bone, pierced or solid depending on the species. Horn cores extend from the brow or nose. Around the edges, small bones may create scallops, hooks, or spikes. It is a face built not only to eat, but to be seen by others of its kind. In life, skin and keratin would have added more shape than bone alone preserves. Predators saw those faces too. A tyrannosaur facing a full-grown horned dinosaur was not attacking a helpless plant eater. It was approaching an animal with mass, muscle, a low center of gravity, and forward-pointing weapons. Bite marks on ceratopsian bones show feeding and perhaps predation, but the risk would have been real. Many hunts fail in modern ecosystems, and many predators avoid healthy adults when easier prey exists. Dinosaurs were not exempt from the basic economics of danger. Tyrannosaur teeth are among the clearest signs of their feeding power. They are thick, recurved, and serrated, with cross-sections more robust than the blade-like teeth of many earlier theropods. This shape allowed them to withstand heavy forces while puncturing and pulling. Bite marks attributed to tyrannosaurs appear on bones of hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, sometimes with signs of showing that at least some animals survived encounters. Other marks on carcasses indicate feeding after death. The teeth tell both hunting and scavenging stories. Scavenging is sometimes treated as if it were lesser than hunting, but in nature it is practical. Meat is meat, and a carcass large enough to feed a predator for days would not be ignored. Lions scavenge. Hyenas hunt. Eagles steal. Wolves eat carrion. A tyrannosaur did not need to choose a single identity. It could pursue live prey when conditions favored it, and feed on dead animals when the opportunity appeared. The fossil record supports capability, not a simplistic label. The bite force of Tyrannosaurus has been estimated as among the strongest known for any land animal, though exact values depend on modeling. The skull was built to handle extreme stresses. The senses were likely acute, with large olfactory regions suggesting a strong sense of smell and forward-facing eyes helping with depth perception. This was an animal whose success came from a combination of size, skull mechanics, growth, senses, and ecology. It was not just large, it was integrated. Even so, Tyrannosaurus was not universal. It lived in western North America, near the end of the Cretaceous. Other continents held different predator lineages. Abelisaurids, with short, deep skulls and reduced forelimbs, were important in parts of Gondwana. Carcharodontosaurids dominated some earlier Cretaceous ecosystems. Spinosaurids occupied distinctive niches in some regions. The idea of one dinosaur as the king of all dinosaurs is more cultural than scientific. Local ecosystems had local rulers. South America during the Cretaceous offers another view of dinosaur rule. There, titanosaurs reached enormous sizes, and abelisaurid theropods filled major predator roles. Fossils from Patagonia have revealed sauropod vertebrae, limb bones, and trackways on scales that continue to challenge assumptions about maximum body size. These animals lived in landscapes that could include broad floodplains, river systems, conifer forests, and open areas. The details changed through time, but the presence of giant herbivores remained one of the defining features of the continent. A titanosaur femur can be taller than a person. Its surface may be cracked by weathering, its ends heavy with the architecture of weight-bearing bone. To lift such a fossil is to feel only the mineral afterlife of a structure that once carried blood and marrow. In life, the bone was not a monument. It was a working part of an animal that had to stand, walk, grow, heal, and reproduce. The more enormous the fossil, the more practical the questions become. Giant size requires more than strong legs. It requires growth strategies, respiratory efficiency, feeding efficiency, reproduction that can produce enough young to sustain populations, and environments productive enough to supply food. Sauropod eggs were large compared with bird eggs, but tiny relative to adult men. This meant that sauropods did not give birth to a few enormous offspring the way large mammals do. They laid eggs, and their young began life vulnerable. Population survival depended on producing enough young that some would reach safer sizes. A nesting ground in Argentina or India carries that logic in curves of shell and rings of sediment. Round eggs arranged in clusters. Thin shell textures, sometimes embryos curled inside. The adult may not have sat directly on the eggs if its weight was too great, but nesting behaviors varied among dinosaurs, and some species likely used vegetation, sediment, or body positioning to manage incubation. The evidence is intimate and incomplete. It brings the giants down to a beginning small enough to fit in a nest. Dinosaurs reproduced by eggs, but their nesting strategies were diverse. Theropods often laid elongated eggs in paired arrangements, reflecting reproductive anatomy. Sauropods generally laid more rounded eggs. Some nests show organization. Some nesting sites contain repeated clutches over broad areas. Eggshell microstructure helps identify major groups. Embryos are rare, but invaluable when found. Through eggs, paleontologists can study development, growth, and behavior in ways that skeletons of adults cannot reveal. The Cretaceous also produced dinosaurs of remarkable ornament. Lambeosaurine hadrosaurs carried crests rising from the skull in shapes like tubes, fans, or hatchets. Pachycephalosaurs had thickened skull roofs, domes that may have played roles in display or combat, though exactly how they used them remains debated. Ceratopsians turned skulls into visual structures of astonishing variety. In these animals, rule was not only weight and teeth, it was communication, recognition, rivalry, and display written in bone. Display structures are difficult to interpret because they rarely leave direct behavioral evidence. A crest can help make sound, attract mates, identify species, regulate temperature, or combine several functions. A dome can absorb impact or serve mainly as visual signal. A frill can protect the neck, anchor muscles, or show off color and shape. Paleontologists test these ideas with biomechanics, growth series, bone histology, comparisons with living animals, and patterns of variation. The answer is often not one function, but several. Living animals remind us not to demand simplicity. A deer antler can be a weapon, a signal, and a seasonal display. A bird crest can communicate species, mood, age, or sex. A crocodile's body carries armor, but also sensory structures and social signals. Dinosaurs were no less biological. Their bodies were not designed for museum clarity. They were full of features shaped by overlapping pressures, feeding, mating, fighting, thermoregulation, movement, growth, and survival. In some Cretaceous deserts, the record becomes more austere. The rocks of the Gobi preserve dunes, interdune flats, ephemeral streams, sudden sand burial, and animals adapted to seasonal stress. Velociraptor, Protoceratops, Oviraptorosaurs, Ankylosaurs, and other dinosaurs lived in these environments. The famous fighting dinosaurs fossil, a Velociraptor and Protoceratops preserved in contact, has often been interpreted as a moment of struggle buried rapidly, perhaps by collapsing sediment. Whether every detail of the moment can be known or not, the association is extraordinary. Protoceratops was not the giant horned dinosaur people sometimes imagine when they hear ceratopsian. It was smaller, sheep-sized, with a beak and frill, common in its environment. Velociraptor was also smaller than its movie image, feathered, lightly built, and equipped with a sickle-shaped claw on each foot. Their world was not a jungle. It was a dry landscape of dunes and scarce water, where sand could cover bodies quickly enough to preserve them in 3 dimensions. Dinosaur rule extended even into such hard places. Oviraptorosaurs add another layer. Once thought, from an early interpretation, to be egg thieves, some fossils later showed adults preserved on nests, suggesting brooding or nest attendance. Their beaked skulls, often with crests, their feathered bodies, and their reproductive evidence make them central to understanding the link between non-avian theropods and birds. The name oviraptor still means egg thief, but the story behind it changed as evidence improved. Paleontology often advances by correcting its own first impressions. That correction is part of the beauty of the field. A fossil is found. A meaning is proposed. More fossils appear. Old bones are scanned, compared, remeasured, or placed in a new evolutionary context. A creature once imagined as a thief becomes a brooding animal. A tail once dragged in old paintings rises into balance. A scaly predator gains feathers. A swamp-bound giant becomes an active animal on dry land. The dinosaur age changes because the evidence keeps speaking. The idea that sauropods lived submerged in swamps, using water to support their weight, has been rejected for many reasons. Their limb bones, trackways, sedimentary settings, and respiratory constraints all point to animals that walked on land. Many lived near rivers and floodplains, but near water is not the same as underwater. Likewise, theropods did not drag their tails like lizards in old reconstructions. Trackways rarely show tail drag marks, and skeletal anatomy indicates tails held off the ground for balance. These changes in reconstruction are not cosmetic. They affect how the whole animal functions. A tail held high changes balance and locomotion. Legs beneath the body change stride and energy efficiency. Feathers change thermoregulation and display. Air sacs change breathing and skeletal weight. Dental batteries change diet. Horns and crests change social life. Every correction shifts dinosaurs from static reptiles of old art toward animals with specific, testable biology. Yet there is a danger in making them too familiar. Dinosaurs were not mammals in costumes, not birds simply enlarged, not crocodiles with different legs. They were themselves. Their anatomies do not map perfectly onto living animals. Comparisons help, but only to a point. A sauropod has no living equivalent. A ceratopsian skull has no exact modern match. A hadrosaur dental battery is its own solution. The past remains foreign, even when science brings it closer. That foreignness appears in their plant world too. In the Cretaceous, flowering plants spread, but they did so into ecosystems still rich with older lineages. Conifers remained important. Ferns continued to recover quickly after disturbance. Cycads and ginkgos persisted. Some regions gained angiosperm-dominated understories or floodplain vegetation earlier than others. The result was a mosaic, not an instant replacement. Dinosaurs did not wake up in a modern forest. They lived through a long botanical transition. A flowering plant at a Cretaceous river edge might have been small and easy to miss beside conifers and ferns. Yet its presence mattered. Flowers changed relationships with insects. Fruits changed seed dispersal. Leaves changed the texture and nutritional possibilities of the understory. Over time, angiosperms would become central to terrestrial ecosystems. Dinosaurs were present during this transformation, and some of them fed in the changing vegetation, trampled it, dispersed it, or opened ground where new growth could take hold. Grass did not form the wide modern grasslands during most of the dinosaur age. Grasses appeared by the late Cretaceous, but the great grassland ecosystems that shape much of the modern world became important later, in the Cenozoic. This means iconic dinosaur scenes should not be imagined on open grassy savannas. Their open habitats would have been made of ferns, horsetails, low shrubs, bare sediment, seasonal vegetation, or other plant communities, depending on time and place. The ground cover belonged to another world. Remove grass from the scene, and the animal changes with it. A hadrosaur walks not through a meadow, but through a floodplain patchwork of shrubs, ferns, young trees, and wet ground. A theropod steps over fallen conifer branches instead of tall grass. A nest sits in sand, ash, or soil among plants that do not flower in the way most modern plants do. The difference is subtle until you imagine walking there. Then the absence becomes one of the strongest signs that you are not home. The seas of the Cretaceous were also changing. Marine reptiles included plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, sea turtles, and others, while ammonites remained abundant until the end. Mosasaurs, close relatives of lizards and snakes, became major marine predators in the late Cretaceous after evolving fully aquatic bodies with powerful tails and paddle-like limbs. They were not dinosaurs, but they shared the planet's final Mesozoic seas. Above some coastlines, pterosaurs with wingspans larger than small aircraft crossed the air. The largest Azhdarchid pterosaurs may have stood as tall as giraffes when on the ground, moving on all fours with long limbs and enormous skulls. Their fossils suggest animals capable of flight, but also potentially stalking across terrestrial environments. A dinosaur on a floodplain may have seen one pass overhead or land nearby. The age of dinosaurs included these aerial giants, not as background decoration, but as living animals occupying shorelines, plains, and skies in ways still being studied. Pterosaurs are often confused with dinosaurs, but they were a separate group of flying archosaurs. Marine reptiles are also often folded into dinosaur imagery, though they were not dinosaurs either. These distinctions may seem technical, but they clarify the richness of the Mesozoic. Dinosaurs ruled the land, while pterosaurs ruled the skies for much of the era, and marine reptiles filled oceanic roles. The world was not dominated by one group everywhere. It was partitioned among related and unrelated lineages, each with its own history. That partitioning makes the land story even more striking. Dinosaurs did not conquer the oceans. They did not replace pterosaurs in the skies until birds diversified. Their great success was terrestrial. On land, across changing continents and climates, their body plans repeatedly became the framework for large animal life. They were the browsers, grazers in a pre-grass sense, armored tanks, runners, nesters, pack possibilities, solitary hunters, scavengers, display animals, and eventually flyers through one branch that became birds. The phrase rule can hide this complexity, but it also captures something real. For most of the Jurassic and Cretaceous, if you stood in a terrestrial ecosystem and looked for the largest animals, you would usually be looking at dinosaurs. If you looked for the dominant large herbivores, dinosaurs. If you looked for the dominant large predators, dinosaurs. If you looked for many of the trackways crossing mud, dinosaurs, their presence was not occasional. It was structural. A floodplain at dusk makes that structure visible. Large herbivores open paths through plants. Smaller animals use the paths afterward. Predators follow scent trails. Insects feed on dung and dead leaves. Seeds fall into disturbed soil. A carcass near the water changes the behavior of everything around it for days. The dinosaurs are not separate from the ecosystem. Their bodies create habitat, move nutrients, spread disturbance, and become part of the sediment when they die. Even dung becomes evidence. Coprolites can preserve plant fragments, bone shards, pollen, parasite traces, and chemical signals. They are unglamorous fossils, but they return digestion to the story. An animal ate, processed, and passed material through its body. That material entered soil, fed smaller life, and sometimes hardened into stone. A kingdom can be studied through teeth and skulls, but it can also be studied through what was left behind on the ground. Dinosaur skin impressions show scales of different shapes and sizes across the body. Some had pebbled skin, some larger scutes, some feathered regions, and some combinations. Skin rarely preserves because it decays quickly, but under rapid burial, desiccation, or fine sediment conditions, impressions can remain. These fossils correct overly smooth reconstructions. They show that dinosaurs had texture, regional variation, and surfaces adapted to the practical needs of living bodies. A skin impression from a hadrosaur can cover enough area to suggest the curve of the animal's side. It may show small scales arranged like a pattern pressed into clay. There is no color in most cases, no warmth, no movement. Yet the impression is intimate. It is not the deep skeleton, it is the boundary between animal and world. Rain, insects, sunlight, mud, another dinosaur's shoulder in a crowded herd, all would have met that surface first. Color is more difficult, but not entirely lost. In exceptional feathered fossils, microscopic structures called melanosomes can sometimes preserve, and comparisons with living birds can suggest possible colors or patterns. These methods are powerful, but limited. They work best in certain tissues and preservation settings. They do not turn every dinosaur into a fully colored portrait. Still, where they apply, they show that some dinosaurs had visual complexity beyond bone, bands, dark feathers, lighter patches, perhaps display patterns that mattered in life. Sound is even harder. We do not have dinosaur voices preserved. Some skulls and crests suggest possible resonance chambers. The inner ear can reveal aspects of hearing and balance. The closest living relatives, birds and crocodilians, both produce sounds, which suggests dinosaurs were not mute. But the actual calls of most dinosaurs remain beyond recovery. A hadrosaur crest may have produced low resonant sounds. A tyrannosaur may have made closed-mouth vocalizations or other calls. These are possibilities, not recordings. The silence of fossils is not empty. It is a boundary. We can reconstruct bones, muscles, posture, diet, growth, and sometimes behavior. We can infer climates, rivers, and forests, but the exact sound of a Cretaceous dawn is gone. The calls, footfalls on dry leaves, wing beats of pterosaurs, insect noise, water against a bank, breath from a sauropod's throat, all of it has left no direct trace. The stone gives shape, not sound. Because of that, the most honest reconstruction keeps one foot in evidence and one in imagination. Too much evidence without imagination becomes a list. Too much imagination without evidence becomes fantasy. The dinosaur age asks for both, held in balance. A track tells us where a foot landed. The sediment tells us the ground was wet. The spacing suggests movement. Imagination lets us place morning light on the water, but it should not change the stride. Bone histology has transformed the study of dinosaur lives. Thin sections of fossil bone reveal growth patterns, vascularization, remodeling, and age-related changes. Some dinosaurs grew rapidly, especially large theropods and sauropods. Others had different growth trajectory. Histology can show when an animal reached sexual maturity, how growth slowed, or whether a small specimen is a juvenile rather than a separate species. This has revised dinosaur taxonomy more than once because young animals can look dramatically different from adults. A juvenile skull may have larger eyes, shorter horns, different proportions, or less developed ornamentation. If found alone, it might seem like a separate animal. Growth series, when enough specimens exist, reveal transformation through life. A horn lengthens, a frill changes, a crest expands, a skull deepens. Dinosaurs, like living animals, had ontogeny, the unfolding of form from hatchling to adult. A species was not one shape. It was a sequence. Sexual dimorphism, the difference between males and females, is difficult to prove in many dinosaurs. Older claims often relied on size or ornament differences that could also reflect age, species variation, or individual variation. Without large samples and clear growth data, it is risky to assign sexes to most fossils. This is another place where caution matters. Dinosaurs almost certainly had sex-based differences in some species, as many animals do, but identifying them in stone is not simple. Disease also appears in bone. Infections, tumors, arthritis, healed fractures, bite injuries, and stress marks tell us that dinosaurs lived with bodily limits. A massive animal could suffer from damaged joints. A predator could lose teeth and replace them. But a broken jaw could change its future. A herbivore could survive an attack only to carry infection. These pathologies make the animals less like symbols and more like organisms. Rule did not mean invulnerability. The longer you look at fossils this way, the less the dinosaur age feels like a parade of species, and the more it feels like a collection of lives. Most were ordinary by the standards of their own worlds. Most did not die in dramatic events. They hatched, fed, avoided danger, grew, reproduced if they were fortunate, and died. Only a few became fossils. Fewer still were found. Fewer still were named. Behind every named species were countless unnamed individuals lost completely. That loss is part of the scale. Dinosaurs ruled for so long that entire lineages arose, flourished, and disappeared before others ever evolved. Jurassic stegosaurs were ancient history by the time Triceratops appeared. The first birds were already tens of millions of years old before the final tyrannosaurs walked. Titanosaurs in South America belonged to a world far removed from the early Triassic animals that began the dinosaur story. Deep time is not a backdrop. It is the main force. To understand that force, imagine moving through the dinosaur age not by date, but by ground surface. First, a Triassic basin under a red sky after dust has risen from dry flats. The soil cracks around shrinking pools. Small archosaurs leave prints beside larger ones. A low plant community holds on near a seasonal stream. A dinosaur appears briefly, light and narrow, stepping with its body raised, then disappears behind a bank. It is present, but it does not yet own the scene. Now shift forward after the extinction. The same planet has been wounded by volcanism and climate disruption. Many of the old large reptiles are gone from the roles they once held. The air is not literally full of ash everywhere, and life is not starting from nothing, but the land communities have been thinned and rearranged. A dinosaur lineage that had survived at the margins now finds fewer obstacles. The next prints in the mud are deeper, more common, and more varied. This pattern of survival followed by expansion appears repeatedly in Earth history. Mass extinctions remove lineages and open ecological space, but they do not create winners by intention. The survivors are not always the strongest or most advanced. They are those whose traits, ranges, diets, body sizes, and sheer luck carry them through the crisis. Dinosaurs benefited from the end Triassic extinction not because the extinction was made for them, but because it removed many competitors and left them able to radiate. There is a moral temptation in any rise to dominance. It is easy to say that dinosaurs were destined to rule because they were better. The rocks are less sentimental. They show contingency. Had the volcanic pulses been different, had certain competitors survived, had climate stress fallen unevenly in another way, the next 160 million years of land vertebrate history might have looked different. Dinosaur rule was real, but it was not guaranteed. That makes it more remarkable, not less. In the early Jurassic, a young sauropodomorph might browse among conifers while its world still carried the aftertaste of catastrophe. It would not look like a later Diplodocus. Its body would be smaller, its proportions still nearer the transitional forms that connect early long-necked dinosaurs to the giants. Around it, ferns grow in damp places, cycads hold stiff leaves, and small animals move through cover. The future is present only in hints: longer neck, heavier body, limbs beginning to bear weight in a new way. Over millions of years, these hints became architecture. The sauropod body plan concentrated mass in a large torso, reduced the skull, lengthened the neck and tail, and placed the limbs as pillars beneath the body. The vertebrae became complex structures of bone and air spaces. The digestive system likely held plant matter long enough for microbial fermentation. The teeth replaced continually as they wore down. Every part of the animal participated in the solution. Gigantism was not one feature, it was a system. The result was a living bridge between ground and canopy. A sauropod standing near a conifer could feed without rearing, without climbing, without moving the heavy body every few seconds. Its neck explored space. Its feet remained planted until the local food was stripped enough to justify another step. Each step cost energy. Each movement of the neck cost less. In a world of abundant but tough vegetation, that difference mattered. scale and efficiency worked together. It is possible to overstate how high all sauropods fed. Some probably browsed low or mid-level vegetation. Some may have fed from different heights at different ages or in different environments. Neck flexibility varied. Limb proportions varied. Tooth shape varied. The animal people picture from one mounted skeleton is often only one species from one lineage. Sauropoda contained many answers to the same broad problem of feeding large herbivorous bodies. Their diversity is hidden when they are treated only as long-necked dinosaurs. A sauropod skull on a preparation table can look almost too small for the rest of the animal. The teeth sit at the front or along the jaws depending on species, simple compared with the grinding machinery of later hadrosaurs. The openings in the skull reduce weight. The nostril position, jaw mechanics, and tooth wear all become clues. The head was not the center of power, it was the harvesting end of a much larger biological machine. Large bodies changed predator behavior. A theropod did not need to imagine a sauropod as prey in the way a lion imagines an antelope. A full-grown giant was more like moving terrain, dangerous by mass alone. But a herd or loose aggregation of sauropods also contained smaller individuals, injured adults, and carcasses. Predators could live in the shadow of giants by exploiting vulnerability where it appeared. Dinosaur rule was not a stable hierarchy. It was constant negotiation between size, hunger, risk, and opportunity. A riverbend could become a place of memory without any animal remembering it. Sauropods return because water remains there longer into the dry season. Theropods learn, by habit or chance, that weakened animals appear near the mud. Plants are trampled and regrow. Turtles slide from banks. Insects gather in dung and carcasses. Year after year, sediment records flood, drought, crossing, burial. Later, the rock holds bones from different seasons and different deaths in one layer, and we call it a site. Bone beds can form in many ways. A drought may concentrate animals around shrinking water until many die. A flood may transport bones from different carcasses and deposit them together. A predator trap may lure animals into mud or soft sediment. A river channel may rework older remains. Distinguishing these processes requires studying bone orientation, abrasion, breakage, sediment grain size, associated fossils, and the surrounding geology. The story of a bone bed is often a story of water as much as animals. The Morrison Formation is full of such geological patience. Its colors, sandstones, mudstones, and limestones preserve changing floodplains and channels across the late Jurassic. Quarries within it have yielded animals so familiar that their names have become almost archetypes. But each quarry has its own history. At one, bones may have accumulated through drought and scavenging. At another, a river may have swept carcass parts into a channel. At another, fine sediment may have covered remains before they were destroyed. The skeleton in a museum is often assembled from this disorder. Missing bones are cast from other individuals. Crushed bones are stabilized. Distorted fossils are corrected or left as evidence of pressure. A mounted animal becomes a clean reconstruction of an animal that died messily, was buried unevenly, fossilized incompletely, eroded unpredictably, and excavated with human hands. There is no dishonesty in the mount. But the mount is the final sentence of a much longer process. The Jurassic predator communities were also more complex than a single apex animal. Allosaurus may be the most famous late Jurassic predator in North America, but Ceratosaurus, Torvosaurus, Martiasaurus, and smaller theropods shared the broader landscape. Differences in skull shape, body size, tooth form, and relative abundance suggest niche partitioning. Some may have hunted different prey or used different habitats. Some may have scavenged more often. Some may have been rare simply because large predators occur at lower population densities. Social behavior in theropods remains difficult to prove. Multiple individuals found together can indicate group living, but they can also indicate drought, traps, or repeated accumulation. Parallel tracks may show animals moving together, or separate animals crossing a surface at different times. Modern predators range from solitary to highly social, and dinosaurs likely varied as well. Some theropods may have tolerated each other at carcasses or moved in loose groups. Others may have been solitary outside breeding or feeding events. The evidence rarely allows a single sweeping answer. A set of theropod footprints crossing a mudflat can still raise the question. The prints run in the same direction, spaced with similar stride lengths. Did the animals move together? Heads low, tails balanced? Watching a herd? Or did the same shoreline funnel many individuals along one route over several days? The rock does not speak loudly enough to settle the scene completely. It offers a pattern. The interpretation has to remain lighter than the mud was. Herbivore social behavior leaves its own traces. Trackways of sauropods may show multiple individuals moving in similar directions, sometimes with smaller prints among larger ones. Hadrosaur bone beds preserve many animals together. Ceratopsian sites sometimes contain repeated individuals in ways that suggest grouping. Nests in colonies imply tolerance or repeated use of shared areas. But even here, careful reading matters. Animals can gather for water without forming herds. Floods can collect bodies that never walk together. The best supported conclusion is broad but important. At least some dinosaurs engaged in social behavior, and that behavior varied by group, age, season, and context. Birds, the living dinosaurs, show enormous behavioral diversity, from solitary hunters to colonial nesters to complex flocking species. Crocodilians also show social signals and parental care. It would be surprising if non-avian dinosaurs were behaviorally simple. The fossil record cannot reveal every detail, but it does not support a world of isolated automatons. Parental care is another area where evidence has grown richer. Some nests show adult theropods positioned over eggs in ways consistent with brooding. Maiasaura nesting sites have been interpreted as evidence for colonies and care of young, though details continue to be discussed. Embryos and growth studies suggest different strategies across groups. Some young may have been mobile soon after hatching, others may have depended on adults longer. Dinosaur reproduction was not one behavior repeated across all species. A nest is a rare kind of fossil because it records intention indirectly. Eggs placed in a pattern, sediment disturbed, adults nearby or absent, shell fragments broken by hatching, trampling, or burial. The animal is not just a skeleton now, it is a reproducing organism shaping the ground for the next generation. In a world ruled by dinosaurs, the nest may be as important as the skull. It is where rule renews itself or fails. The survival of a hatchling was never assured. Small size made it vulnerable to mammals, lizards, snakes in later periods, crocodile relatives, small theropods, larger theropods, disease, exposure, and starvation. A nest could flood. Eggs could overheat or cool. A predator could find them. Many young died. This is not a dark exception. It is normal life. The abundance of dinosaurs over millions of years means that enough survived, not that survival was easy. As the Cretaceous progressed, dinosaur communities became increasingly regional. In Asia, ceratopsians developed along paths that produced both small forms and later larger relatives. Oviraptorosaurs diversified. Dromaeosaurs and troodontids occupied small predator roles. Hadrosaurs spread widely. In South America, titanosaurs and abelisaurids were prominent. In North America, tyrannosaurs eventually rose to dominance, while horned dinosaurs and hadrosaurs became major herbivores. In Europe, island settings produced distinctive faunas, sometimes with smaller body sizes shaped by limited resources. Island dwarfism is known in some fossil animals and may apply to certain dinosaurs from Cretaceous Europe, where fragmented land masses created island ecosystems. Smaller body size can evolve when resources are limited and large predators are absent or reduced, but each case requires evidence. Dinosaurs on islands did not all shrink, and not every small species is a dwarf. Still, Island environments add another dimension to the dinosaur age, showing how geography could reshape even giant lineages. Imagine a Cretaceous island, not as a tropical paradise, but as an isolated landmass with its own constraints. Coastlines shift. Storms rework beaches. Plants grow in limited space. Animals cannot simply disperse across a continent. A sauropod lineage, cut off for generations, may trend smaller. Predators may be fewer. Evolution works with boundaries. The same basic dinosaur body plans become altered by the size of the land beneath them. Continental drift is one reason dinosaur faunas differ so strongly through time. During the early Mesozoic, connected land allowed broader dispersal. Later, oceans and seaways separated populations. Isolation promotes endemism, the evolution of species unique to certain regions. This is why late Cretaceous dinosaurs from North America are not the same as those from South America, Mongolia, Madagascar, India, or Europe. The Earth itself divided the experiment into separate laboratories. Madagascar offers a glimpse of one such laboratory. Fossils from the late Cretaceous Meverano Formation preserve abelosaurid predators like Majungasaurus, sauropods, birds, crocodile relatives, mammals, frogs, and other animals in a seasonally dry environment. Majungasaurus bones show evidence of growth, pathology, and even tooth marks from its own kind, suggesting cannibalism or at least feeding on conspecific carcasses. The island setting was harsh, seasonal, and distinctive, far from the classic North American imagery of the dinosaur age. Cannibalism sounds dramatic, but in ecological terms it is not surprising. Many living animals feed on members of their own species under certain conditions, especially as scavengers. Tooth marks on Majungasaurus bones indicate that individuals of the same species fed on carcasses, though whether they killed each other is harder to say. Again, the fossil gives contact and feeding, not motive. The important point is that dinosaur behavior included the same hard practicalities seen in living ecosystems. Madagascar also reminds us that the dinosaur age was not only a northern story. South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, Australia, and Madagascar all carried their own Mesozoic histories. Some are less complete because rocks are harder to access, less studied, or less exposed. But every new discovery in these regions widens the picture. The world ruled by dinosaurs was global, and much of it is still underrepresented in the stories most often told. Antarctica, too, preserves dinosaurs. During the Mesozoic, it was not the ice-covered continent of today, though it still experienced high-latitude light regimes. Fossils from Antarctica and Australia reveal dinosaurs living in cooler, seasonally dark environments. These animals challenge the idea that dinosaurs were limited to warm tropical worlds. They also raise questions about migration, insulation, metabolism, and plant productivity under long winter darkness. The poles were part of dinosaur history, not empty margins. A polar forest in the Cretaceous would have seen months of low light and long twilight. Deciduous plants may have dropped leaves in response to seasonal darkness. Animals could have followed food, slowed activity, or remained adapted to local conditions. Snow is possible in some high-latitude Mesozoic environments, though not on the scale of modern polar ice sheets. A dinosaur track in such a setting carries a different atmosphere from one pressed into warm coastal mud. It belongs to endurance. Metabolism remains one of the most debated aspects of dinosaur biology. Evidence from bone growth, posture, predator-prey ratios, isotopes, and relationships with birds suggests many dinosaurs were more active than traditional reptiles, but they likely did not all share the same physiology. Large bodies retain heat differently from small bodies. Feathered small theropods may have been highly active and insulated. Giant sauropods may have maintained stable internal temperatures, partly through mass. The old categories of cold-blooded and warm-blooded are often too crude. Modern biology offers more nuance. Animals can regulate temperature in different ways. They can generate metabolic heat, rely partly on environment, use behavior to warm or cool, or benefit from thermal inertia at large size. Dinosaurs probably occupied a spectrum. Their living descendants, birds, have high metabolic rates. Their closest living non-avian relatives, crocodilians, have lower ones but complex behavior and physiology. Non-avian dinosaurs sat in evolutionary space between and around these comparisons, with variation across lineages. This is another reason the dinosaur age resists simple images. The sauropod under a midday sun, the feathered theropod in a cool forest, the hadrosaur herd in a coastal plain, the small polar ornithopod in winter darkness, and the armored ankylosaur near a river did not all solve heat, movement, and energy in the same way. Rule was a plural condition. It belonged to many bodies doing different things successfully. Size itself became a recurring theme, but small dinosaurs were no less important. The small-bodied lineages are where many evolutionary transitions happened quickly. Feathers, flight-related anatomy, changes in limb proportion, and diverse diets appear most clearly among smaller theropods. Small herbivores and omnivores filled ecological spaces beneath the notice of giant focused storytelling. Many were closer to the size of turkeys, dogs, or sheep than elephants. Their absence from popular imagination is not an absence from the Mesozoic. A tiny jaw with teeth worn from plants can matter as much as a giant skull. A small limb bone can show growth strategy. A feathered tail in fine sediment can reveal display. A nest of small eggs can show reproduction. Fossils do not become important only when they are large enough to stand under. Sometimes the most important pieces of the dinosaur story are the ones that would fit in a drawer. Mammals lived under dinosaur rule for the entire Mesozoic, and they were not all identical shrew-like animals, though many were small. Some climbed, some burrowed, some glided, some ate insects, plants, or even small vertebrates. A few Mesozoic mammals were capable of preying on young dinosaurs. But they did not become the dominant large land animals, while non-avian dinosaurs flourished. Their history during this time was one of persistence, diversification in smaller roles, and waiting without intention for a world that would change after the impact. The relationship between dinosaurs and mammals was not simply oppression. Ecosystems are not political systems. Mammals occupied niches that dinosaurs often did not, especially nocturnal, small-bodied, and burrowing roles. Dinosaurs occupied large herbivore and predator roles. There was overlap in some cases, especially with small dinosaurs and mammals competing for insects or small prey. But the Mesozoic was not a failed age for mammals. It was an age in which they evolved quietly and survived two mass extinctions, including the one that ended non-avian dinosaur dominance. In the darkness of a Jurassic or Cretaceous night, a mammal might move beneath the feet of sleeping dinosaurs, nose working through leaf litter, whiskers brushing fern stems. Above it, a theropod rests with feathers fluffed for insulation, or a herd of herbivores shifts near water. The mammal does not know it is living in the age of dinosaurs. It is living in the age of avoiding being eaten, finding food, and raising young. The label belongs to us. Labels help organize time, but they can also hide continuity. The end Triassic extinction did not make a completely new planet overnight. The Jurassic-Cretaceous boundary did not make all Jurassic-style ecosystems vanish at once. The asteroid did not eliminate every lineage. Life is continuous through boundaries, though altered. The names Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous are tools placed on a flow of sediment, evolution, and extinction. Dinosaurs crossed some boundaries and were stopped by others. The final boundary is the hardest to look at because it is both sudden and select. A tyrannosaur lineage that had taken tens of millions of years to reach its final form vanished. Ceratopsians vanished. Hadrosaurs vanished. Ankylosaurs vanished. Titanosaurs vanished. Non-avian theropods vanished. Pterosaurs vanished. Ammonites vanished. Many marine reptiles were already gone or disappeared by the boundary. Forests were damaged. Plankton communities collapsed. The world after the impact was not a continuation with fewer species, it was a restructuring. The impact layer itself is thin in many places. A boundary clay enriched in iridium. Shocked minerals. Spherules, signals of material thrown into the atmosphere and distributed around the globe. It can be physically small enough to point at with a finger, yet it marks the end of the Mesozoic. Above and below it, fossils change. The layer is not dramatic to look at in the way a skeleton is dramatic. Its power is in what it separates. Below it, the last non-avian dinosaurs. Above it, none. Below it, the final pages of a world where giant reptiles structured land ecosystems. Above it, recovery, birds, mammals, new forests, and the beginning of another age. The stone does not, it simply changes its contents. Sometimes Earth history turns on a line so thin that it can be missed by someone who does not know what they are seeing. There is grief in that line only because we arrive after the fact. The animals themselves did not know they were ending an era. A nesting dinosaur tended eggs, or did not. A herbivore fed. A predator followed scent. A bird searched for seeds or insects. The impact came from outside the concerns of every living thing below. Extinction often feels meaningful to those who study it later. To the animals inside it, it is weather, hunger, darkness, and the failure of tomorrow to resemble yesterday. Yet the story did not close completely. Birds survived, and with them a part of Dinosauria passed through the boundary. In the Paleogene, birds diversified into many forms, some small and perching, some aquatic, some predatory, some flightless giants. They entered ecosystems where mammals were also expanding. The great non-avian bodies were gone, but the dinosaur lineage remained active, visible, and eventually familiar enough that people would stop seeing it as dinosaur at all. This survival does not make birds living fossils in the simplistic sense. Birds have continued to evolve for 66 million years. They are modern animals, not unchanged relics. But their ancestry matters. A bird is not descended from dinosaurs in the way a person is descended from a distant country and no longer part of it. A bird is a dinosaur, specifically an avian theropod. The classification is not poetic, it is anatomical and evolutionary. That means every modern bird carries the aftermath of the Mesozoic in its bones. The wishbone, feathers, air sacs, eggshell, and many skeletal features connect living birds to their theropod ancestry. Flight has modified their bodies intensely, and many lineages have changed far beyond their Jurassic relatives. But the continuity is real. The dinosaur age left descendants that move through cities, forests, oceans, deserts, and polar regions today. Watch a heron step through shallow water. The foot lifts slowly, toes spreading before they settle into mud. The neck folds and extends. The body waits with controlled stillness. It is not a recreation of a non-avian dinosaur, but there is something instructive in the movement. Balance. Patience. A body built from deep evolutionary inheritance. The track it leaves in mud is not the same as a Jurassic footprint, but it belongs to the same surviving branch of a once much larger tree. Fossils, living birds, rocks, and tracks all tell the story together. No single piece is enough. A mounted Tyrannosaurus gives scale. A feathered fossil gives ancestry. A sauropod vertebra gives engineering. A nest gives reproduction. A pollen grain gives the plant world. A boundary clay gives extinction. A bird on a branch gives survival. The reign of dinosaurs is not contained in one animal. It is distributed across evidence. That distribution is why the title can never be only about dominance. It is also about duration. Dinosaurs ruled long enough for continents to move beyond recognition. Long enough for oceans to open. Long enough for forests without flowers to give way to forests where flowers were increasingly common. Long enough for the first birds to arise, and for their descendants to be the only dinosaurs left. Long enough for the Earth to become, more than once, a different planet. There is another way to measure dinosaur rule, and it begins with the work of finding them. A person kneels beside a slope of badlands where rain has cut thin channels through clay. The ground is hot, crumbly, and pale. Small fragments lie everywhere, most of them only stone. Then one piece shows a texture that is not like the others. It has the grain and curve of bone. Nearby, another fragment appears. Then, another. The animal is not visible yet. It is suggested by pieces, by a line leading into the hill, by the possibility that more of the body remains inside the rock. Discovery often begins without grandeur. The first task is not imagination, but discipline. The surface is mapped, the layer is recorded, the surrounding sediment is described. Loose pieces are collected with their positions noted. Tools remove rock slowly, sometimes with brushes, sometimes with awls, sometimes with dental picks under a shelter from sun or wind. Plaster jackets are built around larger bones so they can be moved without falling apart. A fossil that took millions of years to form can be damaged in a careless second. The animal has already survived deep time. Now it has to survive excavation. Back in a lab, the work becomes quieter and longer. Rock is removed under magnification. Glue stabilizes cracks. CT scans may reveal hidden structures. Preparators follow the surface of bone through stone that can be nearly the same color. A vertebra emerges one lamina at a time. A tooth row appears under dust. A skull crushed flat by pressure is reconstructed digitally or physically. Its distortion understood before its anatomy can be trusted. The dinosaur age is recovered not in one flash, but through patience measured in hours of careful removal. Naming a dinosaur is also more careful than popular stories sometimes suggest. A new species requires comparison with known material. The bones must show distinctive features, not just size differences, crushing, age, or variation within a known species. Paleontologists examine anatomy in detail, shapes of joints, ridges, openings, tooth counts, vertebral structures, limb proportions, and combinations of traits. A name is a scientific claim, not merely a label. It says that this animal represents a recognizable branch of life that can be distinguished from others. Sometimes those claims change. A fossil once placed in one genus is moved to another. Two named species become one after more specimens show variation. A juvenile is recognized as a young form of an already known adult. A fragment once thought diagnostic becomes less useful when new material appears. This is not failure. It is the normal movement of science. The dinosaur age does not change, but our map of it does, becoming sharper in some places and more complicated in others. The public often meets dinosaurs as finished names: Allosaurus, Diplodocus, Triceratops, Velociraptor, but each name sits on a history of excavation, preparation, description, argument, revision, and context. The animal in life had no name. It had a body, senses, hunger, wounds, and a place in an ecosystem. The name is our handle on that reality. It lets scientists compare, discuss. It lets a fossil from a hillside join a larger pattern stretching across continents and millions of years. Some fossils are famous because they are nearly complete. Others are famous because they preserve something rare: feathers, skin, embryos, stomach contents, footprints, or behavior. Many are not famous at all. They sit in drawers, cabinets, and collections, labeled with locality numbers and specimen codes, waiting for the right question. A small bone collected decades ago can become important when new techniques arrive. A fragment ignored because it seemed ordinary can later show that a lineage lived in a place where no one expected it. Collections are part of the dinosaur world too. Not the ancient world itself, but the modern effort to keep contact with it. A museum drawer may hold teeth from a predator that walked near a seaway. A plaster jacket may contain a sauropod vertebra still half buried in rock. A cabinet of eggshells may preserve patterns invisible without a microscope. A tray of tiny mammal jaws may tell what lived beneath the feet of dinosaurs. The age of giants survives in small labels, careful storage, and the patience of people who may never see their work on display. Field sites change as well. A quarry opened in one generation may be exhausted in another. A hillside may erode to reveal new material, then erode again and destroy it. Political borders, weather, funding, local knowledge, and access all shape what is. Dinosaurs are global, but discovery is human and uneven. Some regions have been searched for more than a century, others are only beginning to reveal their Mesozoic record. The story is still being written because the rocks have not all been read. The word ruled can make dinosaurs sound complete, as if their history has been fully collected and arranged. It has not. New species continue to be described, old species continue to be reinterpreted. Feathered fossils have changed theropods, trackways have changed movement, bone microstructure has changed growth, isotopes have changed climate and migration questions, computer models have changed feeding and biomechanics. Every decade adjusts the picture, sometimes gently, sometimes so strongly that older images become artifacts of thought rather than reconstructions of animals. This is why the dinosaur age feels alive in science, even though the animals are gone. It is not alive because the facts are unstable in a careless sense. It is alive because evidence accumulates, methods improve, and old questions become answerable in new ways. The animals remain extinct except for birds, but our relationship to them continues to evolve. A dinosaur mounted in 1910, one mounted in 1980, and one mounted today may stand differently, carry its tail differently, wear different skin, or imply different behavior, all because the evidence has been refined. A long-form journey through their world has to allow that refinement. It should not pretend that every scene is certain. It should say when a behavior is likely, when a posture is debated, when a fossil suggests rather than proves. Dinosaurs do not become less cinematic when treated carefully. They become more convincing. The restraint lets the scale emerge without force. Return for a moment to the Triassic again, because beginnings are easiest to lose after the giants arrive. A small dinosaur steps over sun-cracked mud near the edge of a basin. Its body is not built for fame. It is quick, alert, and vulnerable. The dominant animals around it include reptiles that will not survive the next great extinction in the same roles. The plants are hardy. The air may be hot and dry. Far away, rifts are beginning to open. Nothing in the scene announces that the animal's descendants will become the largest creatures ever to walk on land. Then move forward to a Jurassic floodplain where the ground trembles under sauropod weight. Not constantly, not theatrically, but in the practical way of heavy animals passing near soft sediment. A conifer canopy rises overhead. Ferns grow in wet shade. A stegosaurus leaves cropped vegetation behind it. Allosaurus teeth fall and are replaced. Pterosaurs cross the river. Insects feed in dung. A carcass near a channel draws scavengers, then floods bury the bones. The world is not waiting to become fossil, it is functioning. Now move forward again to the Cretaceous, where a river cuts through a landscape with flowering plants becoming more common. Hadrosaurs grind vegetation with dental batteries. Ceratopsians display skulls that carry species identity in horn and frill. Ankylosaurs browse low, armored from head to tail. Tyrannosaurs grow from long-legged juveniles into deep-skulled adults whose roles may change with age. Small feathered theropods move through brush. Birds perch, fly, feed, and escape. The dinosaur age is still inventing itself near the end. Age structure is one of the most important hidden layers of these ecosystems. A young tyrannosaur may have been a different kind of predator from an adult, faster relative to size, with a lighter skull and longer limbs. A juvenile ceratopsian had a smaller frill and horns not yet fully developed. A young hadrosaur could be prey for animals that would not threaten a full-grown adult. A sauropod hatchling belonged to a vulnerable world of small predators and environmental hazards, while its adult form belonged to a world where size itself deterred attack. This means a single species could occupy multiple ecological roles through its lifetime. Modern animals do this too. Young crocodiles eat insects and small fish before growing into predators of larger prey. Young birds and mammals often use different habitats from adults. Dinosaurs almost certainly changed diets, movement patterns, vulnerability, and social behavior as they grew. Bone histology and growth series help reveal this, but the full lived experience is gone. Still, the principle matters. Dinosaur communities were dynamic not only because species differed, but because individuals changed. Imagine a late Cretaceous tyrannosaur at 15 years old, not yet the massive adult of its final stage, moving along a forest edge. Its legs carry it with more cursorial proportions than an older animal. Its skull is strong, but not yet the deep, crushing instrument it will become. It may hunt different prey, take different risks, or avoid adults of its own species. Years later, if it survives, it becomes another ecological force. Its own species has shifted around it because its body has changed. This kind of life history thinking also affects herbivores. Hadrosaurs grew rapidly and may have formed age-structured groups in some settings. Ceratopsian bone beds sometimes raise questions about whether juveniles, subadults, and adults live together or separately. Sauropod juveniles may have occupied different habitats from adults, perhaps staying in safer cover before joining larger animals or ranging more widely. These ideas are difficult to test, but they are grounded in the reality that animals do not enter the world as miniature versions of their final ecological role. The fossil record captures death more easily than daily behavior, so paleontologists often work backward. If many juveniles are found together, why? If a bone bed lacks young individuals, does that reflect behavior, preservation, or sampling? If trackways show small and large prints together, were they made at the same time? Every clue can have multiple explanations. The science is not simply finding fossils. It is sorting possible histories until the most likely ones remain. The same caution applies to migration. Large herbivores in seasonal environments may have moved long distances in search of food and water. Isotopic studies of teeth and bones can sometimes test movement across different geological regions. Trackways can show direction over limited surfaces. Sediment and plant data can suggest seasonal pressures. But proving migration in extinct animals is difficult. Some dinosaurs likely moved seasonally. Others may have stayed within smaller ranges. The answer depends on species, geography, and climate. Still, a migrating dinosaur herd is not an unreasonable image when placed carefully. A line of hadrosaurs following a river corridor as floodwaters retreat. Sauropods moving between feeding areas across a broad basin. Ceratopsians traveling from upland nesting grounds to lowland feeding zones if local conditions favored such movement. Their tracks would not preserve the whole journey, only moments where mud received them. Deep time keeps the road, not the destination. Weather shaped those roads. Seasonal rains could turn floodplains into sheets of mud. Dry periods could shrink lakes and concentrate animals around water. Storms could topple trees, wash carcasses into channels, or bury footprints under silt. Volcanic ash could fall from distant eruptions and settle over plants, nests, and bodies. Fire may have moved through some Mesozoic landscapes, leaving charcoal in sediment. Dinosaurs did not live under a painted sky. They lived under weather that altered decisions every day. Climate varied over the Mesozoic, but much of the era was warmer with high sea levels during many intervals and no permanent polar ice sheets for long stretches. That warmth helped create productive habitats, but warmth was not the same as comfort. Heat stress, drought, storms, monsoonal cycles, and changing coastlines all affected ecosystems. A giant body could overheat. A nest could dry. A river could flood. Success was always local, always conditional. The plant record helps reconstruct those conditions. Pollen, spores, leaves, wood, charcoal, and fossil soils show changes in vegetation and climate. A fern spike after disturbance can signal recovery in some contexts. Growth rings in wood can indicate seasonality. Leaf shapes can suggest temperature and rainfall. Fossil soils can preserve root traces, carbonate nodules, or chemical signatures. Dinosaurs are often the most visible fossils, but plants and sediments make their world interpretable. A dinosaur tooth found alone in a formation may show that a predator was present. But without plants, sediment, and associated animals, it floats in emptiness. Add pollen, and the vegetation begins to appear. Add fish scales and turtle shells, and water enters. Add mud cracks, and a dry season appears. Add volcanic ash, and a date becomes possible. Add trackways, and movement crosses the surface. The animal becomes part of a place, and the place becomes part of time. This place-based view prevents the dinosaur age from becoming a list of species. Species lists are useful, but they do not breathe. A formation breathes when its river channels, soils, plants, invertebrates, small vertebrates, climate signals, and dinosaur remains are read together. Then a sauropod is not just a long neck, it is a browser in a particular basin. A tyrannosaur is not just a predator, it is part of a specific food web near a seaway at a certain moment before the bound. Some of the most haunting fossils are not the spectacular ones. A line of raindrop impressions beside dinosaur tracks, a mud crack filled with later sediment, a small footprint overprinted by a larger one, a plant stem lying across a track before burial. These details bring weather and sequence into the scene. Rain fell. Mud dried. One animal crossed after another. A plant piece drifted. Time did not only pass in millions of years, it passed in minutes. That is the secret inside deep time. It is made of ordinary moments repeated beyond counting. A sauropod lowers its head. A hatchling breaks shell. A predator loses a tooth. A storm moves across a floodplain. A feather falls into water. A dinosaur sleeps. Another wakes hungry. A river shifts course. One footprint dries before the next flood. None of these moments were meant to last, and almost none did. The few that survived carry the weight of all the others. When dinosaurs ruled the earth, they did not rule every second dramatically. They occupied time the way living animals do, through repetition. Feeding again, walking again, nesting again, escaping again, growing again. Seasons turned. Generations replaced generations. Evolution worked slowly through variation, inheritance, and death. The cinematic scale comes not from constant spectacle, but from duration. The same kinds of needs echoed across more than 100 million years. Then came the end, and even the end had ordinary moments before it. The last day began as a day. Light moved across floodplains. Animals fed. Insects flew. Rivers carried sediment. Somewhere a nest held eggs. Somewhere a carcass drew scavengers. Somewhere a bird lifted from a branch. The impactor approached from space, without meaning, without warning that any animal could understand. It belonged to celestial mechanics, not ecology, until the moment it entered the atmosphere, and ecology had to answer. The destruction near the impact site was immediate beyond comprehension, but the larger extinction unfolded through consequences. Darkness reduced photosynthesis. Cooling and chemical changes stressed plants and plankton. Food chains, large animals with high food demands suffered. Many small animals died too, but enough survivors in certain groups endured to rebuild. The non-avian dinosaurs did not gradually decide to leave. Their world stopped supporting them. The rules of survival changed faster than they could. It is possible that some non-avian dinosaurs survived briefly beyond the exact boundary in isolated places, but there is no convincing evidence that they continued for long into the Cenozoic. The global pattern is stark. Their fossils disappear. Birds remain. Mammals remain. Crocodilians, turtles, lizards, amphibians, fish, insects, and plants continue through loss and recovery. The world does not become safe. It becomes different. After the extinction, mammals expanded into large herbivore and predator roles that dinosaurs had held for ages. Forests recovered and changed. Birds diversified into new forms. Crocodilians remained powerful in aquatic and semi-aquatic habitats. The Cenozoic was not an empty stage, but a new arrangement of survivors. The absence of non-avian dinosaurs created ecological space, just as the absence of many Triassic competitors had once helped dinosaurs. History turned by loss again. There is a symmetry in that, though it should not be made too neat. Dinosaurs rose after catastrophe and fell in catastrophe. But the catastrophes were different, the survivors different, the mechanisms different, and the consequences different. The end Triassic extinction opened pathways for dinosaur dominance. The end Cretaceous extinction closed most of those pathways while leaving one feathered branch alive. Earth did not tell the same story twice. It used extinction as a force, and life responded differently each time. If the asteroid had missed, the future might have been profoundly different. Non-avian dinosaurs could have continued evolving. Mammals might have remained smaller for longer, or some might still have expanded in certain niches. Birds would still have evolved. Flowers would still have shaped ecosystems. But this is speculation. The actual record shows impact, extinction, survival, and recovery. The world we know, including the rise of primates and eventually human, belongs to that outcome, not to the many futures that did not happen. What remains of dinosaur rule now is scattered and everywhere. It is in museum halls where children stand under ribs taller than doorways. It is in desert slopes where bone fragments weather from rock. It is in academic papers measuring growth lines and bite mechanics. It is in quarries where volunteers brush sediment from vertebrae. It is in birds crossing a winter sky. It is in the Atlantic Ocean, still widening from the breakup of Pangaea, in continents that carry the shapes of older separations, in coal, limestone, sandstone, and clay. A fossil track on a roadside slab may hold a moment more enduring than a city. A tooth in a drawer may outlast the language used to label it. An eggshell fragment may preserve a reproductive event from a world before the Himalayas rose to their modern height. A feather impression may connect limestone to flight, and flight to the living animals outside. These remains are not complete, but they are enough to prove that the old world was not imagined. The dinosaurs themselves are gone in their non-avian forms, but their rule is not gone from the Earth's memory. It is held in strata, in names, in scientific revisions, in the shape of bird bodies, and in the way deep time changes the scale of everything human. The reign was not a single throne. It was a long occupation of ecosystems by animals that kept changing as the planet changed beneath them. The more complete view is not that dinosaurs were a single dynasty, but that they repeatedly became the main large-bodied animals in terrestrial ecosystems under many different conditions. They did it in humid forests and seasonally dry basins, on coastal plains and uplands, near polar forests and tropical river systems, on island fragments and broad continental interiors. They did it with necks, beaks, horns, claws, armor, feathers, crests, teeth, tails, growth rates, and reproductive strategies. Their rule was not one solution. It was the ability of a branching group to keep producing solutions. Some of those solutions were temporary. Stegosaurs flourished and faded. Many Jurassic sauropod groups declined while titanosaurs later prospered elsewhere. Large theropod lineages rose and vanished before tyrannosaurs reached their peak. Ceratopsians became iconic near the end, but their early relatives were small animals with very different bodies. Hadrosaurs became abundant late, after long histories of ornithopod evolution. A dinosaur group that looks permanent from the distance of a museum hall may have held its role for only part of the Mesozoic before another group replaced it. This turnover is one of the reasons the age lasted so long. Dominance did not depend on the same species persisting unchanged. It depended on evolutionary replacement within Dinosauria itself. When environments shifted, some groups declined and others expanded. When continents separated, local lineages diverged. When plants changed, herbivore jaws and teeth changed. When predator communities opened, new predators grew large. The dinosaur age was stable at the broad level and restless at the detailed level, like a river that remains a river while every current inside it moves. The fossil record can show this restlessness by placing animals in order. A lower layer contains one community, higher layers contain another. Between them, volcanic ash may provide dates, magnetism may mark reversals, pollen may show vegetation shifts, and sediments may show changing rivers or coastlines. The dinosaurs are not just found in rock. They are arranged by rock. Their rule becomes a sequence that can be tested against the history of the planet. Even a single formation can contain that sequence. In one part of the rock, a river channel cuts into older mudstone. In another, a floodplain soil forms with root traces and carbonate nodules. In another, ash settles and later alters to bentonite. Fossils appear within those contexts, not outside them. A tooth from a predator in a channel deposit may have been washed there. A skeleton in fine floodplain sediment may have been buried near where the animal died. A nest horizon may represent a surface used during one season or many. The rock asks where, how, and when before it allows who. This is why paleontology is as much geology as biology. Without geology, a dinosaur is only an object. With geology, it becomes an organism in time and place. The direction of ancient rivers, the chemistry of soils, the grain size of sediment, the presence of volcanic ash, the distribution of plant fossils, and the orientation of bones all help reconstruct the world. The animal and the landscape are inseparable. To know one without the other is to know only half the evidence. The modern landscapes that expose these fossils can be misleading. A desert badland may preserve a humid Cretaceous floodplain. A dry quarry may hold the remains of a Jurassic wetland. A cold mountain slope may expose rocks formed near a warm sea. Present climate is not ancient climate. The bones appear in today's light, but they belong to other atmospheres, other river systems, other coastlines, and other plant communities. Looking at the place now is only the first step. The rock must be translated. Translation can be delicate. A red mudstone might suggest oxidized floodplain soils, but not every red bed means the same environment. A sandstone body might be a river channel, dune, shoreline, or other deposit depending on structures inside it. Fossil leaves might drift from uplands before burial. Bones might be transported from where the animal lived. Every clue has context, and context has alternatives. The best reconstructions are not the most dramatic ones. They are the ones that survive contact with all the evidence together. This also means there is no single correct way to visualize the entire dinosaur age. A late Jurassic Morrison floodplain should not look like a late Cretaceous Mongolian dune field. A polar forest should not look like a tropical coastal swamp. A Triassic rift basin should not look like a Cretaceous angiosperm-rich floodplain. The details matter because the animals were shaped by those details. A dinosaur is never just a body plan. It is a body plan used in a specific world. One common mistake is to make every Mesozoic forest too lush, too modern, and too green in the same way. Some were dense, some were open, some had seasonal dryness, some were dominated by conifers, some had fern prairies or cycad-rich understories. Later ones included flowering plants in increasing abundance. There were wetlands, coastal flats, uplands, river corridors, volcanic landscapes, and dry basins. Dinosaurs moved through all of these, and their success came partly from their ability to occupy so many forms of land. Another mistake is to imagine all dinosaurs as either gigantic or terrifying. Most species were neither the largest herbivore nor the top predator. Many were small or medium-sized animals living in the dangerous spaces between giants. They browsed, scratched, nested, chased insects, stole eggs, fled larger predators, sheltered from weather, and died without leaving a famous skeleton. A world ruled by dinosaurs still had ordinary dinosaurs, and those ordinary animals filled the ecosystem in ways the spectacular ones could. The small animals also connect most directly to survival. Birds did not arise from sauropods or horned dinosaurs. They came from small theropods, from lineages where feathers, light bodies, grasping limbs, and eventually flight-related anatomy could be refined. The living continuation of the dinosaur story comes not from the largest forms, but from animals closer to the ground, closer to branches, closer to the kinds of bodies that could pass through the end Cretaceous filter. The last dinosaurs standing were not the biggest. They were the ones able to endure the aftermath. There is humility in that. The most powerful bodies of the Mesozoic left the most imposing fossils, but the lineage that survived did so through smallness, flexibility, and flight. A titanosaur could change the horizon, but it could not pass through the months or years of ecological collapse after the impact. A tyrannosaur could crush bone, but it could not bite its way out of a failing food web. A bird could shelter, search, move, and live on resources that vanished less completely. Survival did not follow spectacle. Still, without the giants, the age would not feel the same. Sauropods make the land itself seem capable of producing animals beyond familiar limits. Tyrannosaurs show predation refined into skull and sense. Ceratopsians show herbivores as heavily armed, social, and visually complex. Hadrosaurs show plant processing taken to extraordinary dental sophistication. Ankylosaurs show defense built into skin and bone. Stegosaurs show a Jurassic answer unlike the Cretaceous one that later replaced it. Each group expands the meaning of dinosaur in a different direction. The fact that no single living land animal repeats these combinations is part of their hold on imagination. Elephants are huge, but not sauropods. Rhinoceroses are powerful, but not ceratopsians. Crocodiles are armored predators, but not ankylosaurs or theropods. Birds are dinosaurs, but most living birds carry the lineage in transformed, often small bodies. The Mesozoic produced anatomical experiments that ended, leaving no direct modern equivalent except through comparison. That absence creates distance. The fossils reduce it, but never erase it. Distance is also why the physical anchors matter. A footprint, tooth, eggshell, feather, femur, skull, or ash layer keeps the story from floating away. Without them, the dinosaur age becomes an idea too large to trust. With them, it becomes a set of surfaces and objects. The toe entered the mud here. The tooth broke there. The egg lay in this sediment. The ash settled across this landscape. The bone grew, fractured, healed, mineralized, and weighted. Evidence makes deep time local. Local evidence can also show global change. The same boundary layer that marks the end of the Cretaceous appears in many parts of the world. The same breakup of Pangaea that shaped early dinosaur dispersal is recorded in rift basins, volcanic rocks, and the widening Atlantic. The spread of flowering plants appears in pollen and leaves across continents. Sea level rise appears in marine sediments far from modern coastlines. A quarry may be small, but it can hold a signal that belongs to the planet. Dinosaur rule was therefore both intimate and planetary. It happened in the pressure of 1 foot and in the arrangement of continents. It happened in a nest and in a mass extinction. It happened in the replacement of teeth and in the opening of oceans. It happened as an individual animal leaned into a branch and as evolution shifted herbivore communities over millions of years. The scale moves constantly from palm-sized fossil to supercontinent, and both scales are necessary. For humans, that scale is difficult because our history is short. Agriculture, cities, writing, empires, industry, and modern technology occupy only a tiny fraction of the time since the last non-avian dinosaur died. The entire human story sits near the surface of the Cenozoic, while dinosaurs filled much of the Mesozoic. This does not make human life insignificant. It places it in context. The Earth is older than our concerns, and life has been remade many times before us. That context can be unsettling, but it can also be clarifying. A fossil does not care about human urgency. It formed through burial, mineral replacement, pressure, uplift, erosion, and discovery. It teaches a slower scale of attention. The dinosaur age asks us to imagine success lasting millions of years and ending anyway. It asks us to see dominance as temporary, extinction as real, survival as uneven, and the present as only one surface above many older worlds. There is no need to force a lesson from that. The animals did not live to instruct us. They lived because life continues wherever it can, using the bodies available to it at the time. Dinosaurs became the dominant large animals on land because their lineages found workable forms under Mesozoic conditions. They ended because conditions changed beyond what most of those forms could survive. Birds continued because one branch passed through. The meaning is not imposed, it is in the sequence. So when we say dinosaurs ruled the earth, the phrase should not close this, it should open it. Which dinosaurs? Which earth? Which coastline? Forest, basin, island, seaway, or polar plain? Which period? Which plants? Which predators? Which tracks? Which bones? The answer changes as soon as the time and place become specific. That is what makes the title large enough for a long journey. The rule was real, but it was never simple. The best image may not be a battle or a roar. It may be a series of tracks crossing different surfaces through time. A small Triassic print on a basin floor. A Jurassic sauropod track pressed deep beside a river. A theropod print near a drying lake. A hadrosaur trackway crossing a Cretaceous floodplain. A bird footprint in modern mud. Each one is a body meeting ground. Each one says that life passed here, under conditions that would not last. Together, those tracks form a kind of unwritten history. They do not tell us everything. They do not preserve color, voice, fear, or intention. But they preserve contact. For animals so distant, contact is precious. The earth touched them and kept the mark. That is how a vanished rain remains available to us, not as a complete world restored, but as fragments strong enough to carry us toward it. Even the word Earth has to be handled carefully in this story, because the planet itself was never still. Mountains rose and eroded. Oceans opened and closed. Inland seas advanced, retreated, and left marine fossils in places now far from salt water. River systems shifted across floodplains and abandoned old channels. Volcanic provinces released ash and lava. Climate belts migrated as continents drifted. Dinosaurs did not rule a fixed stage. They ruled a moving one, and the movement helped decide where they could live, how populations separated, and which lineages met or never met. A dinosaur standing on the western shore of the Cretaceous interior seaway would have faced water where modern maps show land. A Jurassic animal in what is now Wyoming lived on a floodplain that would later be raised, buried, eroded, and cut open into badlands. A Triassic dinosaur in Pangaea could move through connected land that would eventually be divided by the Atlantic. The geography of their lives has been disassembled and rearranged. Fossils are therefore also fragments of old maps, coordinates from worlds no longer laid out in the same way. This is why reconstructions often begin beneath the animal, with sediment and landscape, before moving into skin and behavior. The ground determines what can be preserved, but it also determines what can happen. A coastal flat receives footprints differently from a riverbank. A dune can bury a body differently from a flood. A forest floor rich in roots may destroy bone before mineralization. A lake bottom without oxygen may preserve delicate details. The story of a dinosaur fossil begins with the surface it touched and the sediment that followed. Time can compress these surfaces in deceptive ways. A single cliff may expose layers representing thousands or millions of years. To the eye, they sit only meters apart. A fossil from one band and a fossil from another may seem neighboring, but the animals could be separated by intervals longer than all recorded human history. This is why stratigraphy matters. Without it, the past collapses into a crowded mural. With it, distance returns, and the dinosaurs regain their proper separation. The separation is part of the wonder. Stegosaurus did not fail to meet Tyrannosaurus by a small margin. It missed Tyrannosaurus by a span so large that whole ecosystems rose and vanished between them. The first small dinosaurs did not simply precede Triceratops. They belonged to a world of different competitors, different climates, and different plants. Archaeopteryx did not fly above a late Cretaceous horned dinosaur herd. It belonged to Jurassic islands and lagoons. Familiar names become more powerful when they are allowed to stand in their own time. That is also why a broad title has to move slowly. If it rushes, it turns 160 million years into a handful of icons. The real story needs room for transition, small origins, extinction, recovery, gigantism, diversification, feathers, flowers, continental breakup, regional faunas, nesting, growth, behavior, and collapse. None of these alone explains dinosaur rule. Together, they make it visible. The reign was not a single picture. It was a long sequence of changing pictures, each one incomplete but each one grounded in evidence. A final reconstruction, then, should feel less like opening a door into one prehistoric park and more like walking along a cliff face where each layer belongs to another world. The lower beds hold one set of animals. Higher beds hold another. A thin ash gives a date. A bone surface records disease. A track surface records movement. A pollen sample records plants too small to see with the naked eye. Every layer says that the Earth was alive before us, in ways both familiar and profoundly strange. The modern search for dinosaurs continues because erosion is always opening the book at new pages. A rainstorm cuts a slope and exposes a bone end that was hidden the week before. A rancher notices a shape in sandstone. A student splitting shale sees the dark outline of a feather. A road cut passes through a layer rich with tracks. Discovery is not only an expedition into remote deserts. Sometimes it is attention paid to a surface that has just begun to reveal what it held. Technology changes the search as well. Drones map quarries from above. Scanners look inside blocks before preparation. Geochemical tools read traces of ancient environments. Databases compare specimens across museums. Digital models test how a jaw could close or how a neck could move. These methods do not replace the fossil. They extend what can be asked of it. The old bone remains central, but new instruments make it speak in additional ways. There is also a human chain running through all of this. Local guides, preparators, field crews, students, curators, land managers, illustrators, anatomists, geologists, and communities near fossil sites. A dinosaur skeleton in a gallery may carry one scientific name, but many hands brought it there. The ancient animal becomes part of a modern collaboration. Its life was solitary or social in the Mesozoic. Its afterlife is almost always collective. That collective work matters because the dinosaur age is too large for one person, one country, or one generation. The rocks are spread across the planet. The questions cross biology, chemistry, physics, climate science, geology, and art. Each fossil is limited, but together they make a body of evidence strong enough to reconstruct worlds that no human being could ever visit. We cannot go back to the Mesozoic. We can only let the Mesozoic arrive piece by piece. That arrival should always remain partial. A reconstructed landscape is never the whole world. It is a disciplined approximation built from sediment, anatomy, comparison, and probability. Some colors are unknown. Some behaviors are inferred. Some species are known from fragments. Some ecosystems are overrepresented because their rocks preserve well, while others are almost invisible. The gaps are not failures to be hidden. They are part of the honesty of deep time. But partial does not mean weak. A single footprint can prove presence. A healed wound can prove survival after injury. A nest can prove reproduction in a place. A feather can prove a body covering and sometimes a relationship to flight or display. A boundary layer can prove global catastrophe. Enough partial truths, arranged carefully, become a reliable picture. Not complete, not final, but real enough that the animals step out of myth and back onto ground. That is the ground the title rests on. Dinosaurs ruled the earth not because we need them to be grand, but because the evidence shows their bodies filling the land for an immense span of time. Their rule was physical. It had weight, appetite, growth, reproduction, injury, and extinction. It left marks in mud and minerals in bone. It ended for most of them, continued for birds, and remains legible wherever the right rock reaches daylight. The final measure of their reign may be that it cannot be held by one image. A sauropod skeleton gives height. A tyrannosaur tooth gives force. A ceratopsian skull gives display and defense. A hadrosaur jaw gives the machinery of feeding. A feather gives continuity. An eggshell gives beginning. A track gives movement. An ash layer gives time. Together, they make a world that was never designed for human wonder, yet keeps producing it, because it was real, immense, and gone. If there is restraint in the telling, it is because the fossils already carry the scale. They do not need to be pushed beyond themselves. The mud held a foot. The bone held a body. The layer held an ending. From those plain facts, the long Mesozoic opens on its own. What survives is enough to follow, but never enough to exhaust. Each discovery widens the old map slightly, and every widened edge reminds us that most of the dinosaur age remains uncollected, unexposed, or erased before it could become stone. That incompleteness is not a weakness. It is the shape of deep time. Return one last time to the print in stone. The toes point forward. The heel pad fades at the back. The mud that received it no longer exists as mud. The animal that made it left no intention behind, only weight and motion. Around it, the ancient bank is gone, the plants are gone, the river has changed course beyond recognition, and the continent itself has moved. Yet the shape remains. No crown was buried there. No final statement. Only a footfall, pressed into a surface soft enough to remember, and strong enough, later, to endure. In that small hollow, the age of dinosaurs is reduced to something touchable. One animal moving through one place on one day, during the long time when the land belonged, more than to any other giants before or since, to them. The stone keeps the step keeps the animal. And the animal keeps, in silence, the world it crossed.